let's get this thing rolling here. Welcome. Randy, you're gonna stay for a few minutes and say hi and tell everybody what happened with the regional water management.
What year am I shifting here? It was about a month ago, right? Month and a half.
Yeah, so I can't get this thing to advance.
Move chairs, so we have to
I will.
sit here.
Okay, but how do you do this?
Usually click page down. Well, you need to click on it. Click there. First start the presentation.
Okay,
Yeah, why don't you put it on the main screen?
all right, thank you.
I think that the biggest thing, and of course Trina's on that group, is they set some deadlines for project solicitation, especially the short form deadline, as June 1. So that's coming up in a couple of weeks. So last week, Umi Hinman and I went on the road to do project solicitation meetings. We did one in Chester, and we did another in Portola on Wednesday night. So we got the word out. Everybody's going, can we make the deadline? And I'm going, well, think about when you're in school and you wrote that term paper. Did you write it the 2 weeks before, or did you write it the night before? And get it to your typist in the morning when I'm dating myself, who's ready to kill you because it's due at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. At this point,
You're the typist.
I did.
We're talking time warp here.
We're talking graduate school before computers came out here, John. Come on, you know that. So right now the deadline is June 1 for the short form. And one of the things I like to look at in these projects is what problem are you trying to solve? If you frame it that way, you might be able to identify more projects you think should come forward. Because you've identified a problem you need to fix, therefore there's a project there. That's not all inclusive, but it is one perspective to kind of kick things along. We've talked about that at these meetings.
For example, finalizing the network of fuel breaks.
Exactly.
Right. There's a problem there.
So
Because if you don't, it's going to burn us all down. Whatever. But
So we're gonna start, we're showing the strategies and start the, the out your work areas, but you also need to put your specific projects and using this form. So I will be available to help people do that so we can get them on the list.
so that was a topic of discussion again last night at this year about a groundwater management district meeting. That district is a medium priority basin according to Bulletin 118, and they are required to do a groundwater management plan to the new legislation passed in 2014. And they're sitting there going, what do we do? And I'm saying one of the obvious projects, guys, is to get money to hire a consultant to help you do the plan. He said it's going to be very difficult for that district to do their own plan internally. Lee and I can help with some grant money we have, but we really can't do the plan for them. They're going to have to make some hard choices when that plan comes up. And I said, look, that's why you have a consultant. They're used to getting beat up. So they decided to have a special meeting next Monday night. I'll be back in Loyalton again, identifying projects for the short form to get it in on time by June 1. So that's the real takeaway from that meeting. Trina, you have anything to add to it?
Trina's on the regional water management committee, for those of you who don't know Trina. No.
No, I wasn't at that meeting. I was writing one of those papers that was due this morning. So we really went over some of the objectives and how we're going to categorize and prioritize projects. And so we're trying to dovetail the process and give everything an equal chance. So we're redefining some of the language in the objectives and in those categories.
Yeah, yes, project prioritization came up. You were at the meeting, Michael. You were at that discussion. They gave us direction to kind of go back to the drawing board. We're still working on that. One idea is to have groups of projects that prioritize within those groups. So forest projects, meadow restoration projects, municipal projects, agricultural related projects, take place that way. We still haven't finalized that with the group.
We finalize at this next meeting.
We hope to. We'll be bringing some ideas back. So that's something that's not resolved at this point by that group. And again, looking for balance and fairness in how that all happens.
Also, the idea of partnerships was really stressed, so instead of looking at just a really small project, unless it's absolutely necessary, the idea that a project serves a larger population, just like our state government set up to
We saw you.
support Southern California more than Northern California oftentimes.
I didn't.
But really, if we can dovetail some of the, maybe forest stuff with meadow stuff, or figure out how to work better and be more competitive, it would be to everyone's advantage.
Okay, so Michael?
Yeah, I'd like to propose a project that would continue the Quincy Library Group plan for the next 10 years for water and biological benefits. Is that something that can be done?
Yeah, yes, we are taking all suggestions.
All sizes, all paces and
Yes,
scales?
because we don't know where the water bond is gonna go.
Right.
And that was the big source of funding we're after. But there are smaller sources of funding that are ongoing in other parts of the water bond. And there's some federal legislation happening. There's lots of things in the air, and our job is to be ready for whatever happens at whatever scale it happens. Aiming for the big scale, but also being able to pull back to smaller scales.
Well, one of the reasons that I was thinking about this scale is that it is the Feather River watershed. It does have a history of analysis.
Right.
It does have a whole bunch of already prepared material. And it's probably farther along than any of the big projects for storage money on the surface.
Yes, if we can change how they're proposing to move those projects forward, which is one of the letters that Randy will be sending out today on behalf of the Lewis County Board of Supervisors, going not so fast. These storage projects don't even have their basic land and water rights. You need to look at other things like what happened to the whole system above the dams. So we're starting that whole political pressure piece at the same time. We're getting ready on this level to say, well, what if they say yes? Can we really do it? And so our thinking is we will be looking for early projects on the private lands, because you guys can move a whole lot faster than the federal government can move. But by the same token, we want to be able to scale up to the federal lands as well. And then the tribes are going to be big players. Katrina's here representing the tribes. So maybe we'll be starting out with the buoys, if they're most ready to go. But we want to be able to tell them, just bring it on. You get 8 years of continuous storage money here. We've got a 1-year program. We got a 5-year program. We have a 10-year program. We can scale up. We can scale down. So that's what we're trying to do on this level, is get ready for if they give us a chance, we can go for this. And so we're relying on that institutional capacity that was built in Quincy Library Group. But we're also knowing that because this is water, it's a water series that we're definitely looking at the water aspects of this. So yeah, the answer is let's get these projects that show on all these time frames and with the public and private lands that we could actually move some money if they gave us the chance to do that. So
And as I take it, we're also in our resource management strategy, which is what I would be trying to write up. Would this be the place to put in a governance structure for the project?
Michael is also working on the collaborative forest land stewardship project. Mike, is she a chance to talk about that? You're doing outreach and meetings, which has the potential of a structure, but we shouldn't tie our boat to just one structure. So I guess the answer is yes.
Well, I think the lesson that I thought, one of the lessons we learned in the library group program is that tying the governance structure to the federal government is not the way to go. And since this is non-federal money, the governance structure could be much more collaborative than the last structure, because the source of money is.
And I think it's, again, we're going to, somebody from our group is going to a workshop on the 20th to really dig into what are the fine details of the storage bond proposal, and they will be bringing this up, and our understanding at this point is federal partners are welcome, but they're not in charge. So we know we have to do something a bit different than we
For
did.
the groundwater sustainability fund?
For the storage bond money, the 2.7 billion, and because it's state bond funds, they're gonna wanna see some leadership at the state and private level, not the federal level. However, the federal level is a big piece of this and can also bring some of the partnership dollars we need to make it move as well. So that's why Mike is working on that collaborative forest land stewardship, which our neighbors to the north and the Pit River have.
No, let me talk about that.
Yeah,
So there is this process moving forward. It's a process initiated by me via the Uplands County Fire Safe Council, taking advantage of the last of the Title II of secure rural schools as we knew at that time. Secure rural schools is now continued again for at least 2 more years, although we haven't seen the amounts. I'm not even sure that all 3 titles are a part of that, but I think that they are. And so that's enough on that. But anyway, we have those funds. The idea was at that time, 2012, when that was submitted, HFQLG was winding down. It turns out it wound down. And so the idea was, let's have something else that has some level of influence, if you will, on public lands. Because that is the game right now. It's collaborative forest landscape restoration. So we developed that process. So I've been working very closely with Ryan. Ryan's actually the contract administrator, if you will, on this agreement between the Plymouth County Fire Safe Council and the Plymouth National Forest. So we did a number of community meetings, Chester, Portola, Quincy, Greenville, pretty good attendance. Those were just to promote this endeavor. And then we now have had 1 community meeting in Quincy 2 weeks ago. Also, all of those were well attended, and the Quincy meeting was fairly well attended. At Quincy, Greenville, nice contingent of QLG members, John Sheehan, Mike Yost, Brian West, and Tom Downey, a number of folks, which from my perspective is really good because you've got some potential to pass the baton to those who have been in the trenches on collaborative landscape level forest restoration. So now we're doing community meetings. We're actually meeting as the group now. So we did this one in Quincy on May 20. We'll be in Portola. So we're moving them around. And the idea was, and this is no different than what we did in the earliest days of Quincy. We moved it around to get interest. Over time, we found that, well, the people who were most interested were based largely in Quincy, with the exception of Collins and some of the other school folks. They would travel. But in terms of community members, it was limited pretty much to Quincy. And so, as a consequence, we maintained our meetings that after the law was passed anyway, in Quincy. Very rarely meeting elsewhere. In the early days, we tried every possible method to get people to show up. And we're going through that again. So we've got a whole new crop of people that are expressing interest. I will say this, they are largely influenced by fire-wise communities. Fire-wise communities are an outgrowth of actually part of the secure rural schools, but Fire Safe Council and Plymouth County Office of Emergency Services. It's landowners taking an interest in their community to make it more fire resilient, but also recognizing around them the potential and the need to do something to help outside the community for resiliency. So we're getting good meetings. At this moment, we're doing all that laborious, basic stuff of learning who's who, what their interests are, developing a name. What are we going to call ourselves? That was part of our agenda. Will continue to be a part of our agenda until we figure out what that will be. identifying a vision, same thing we did with QLG, that's it. Yesterday I was asked, we met yesterday, and Ryan asked me, how long did that take? Well, we started in November '92, we didn't finish the community development proposal until July of 1993. So it was a long time. So
Published in November.
What's that?
Published in October.
Yeah, so these processes take a while. So we're in the process, and I'm looking at it as a restarting, reloading, kind of a process. No different. It's happening. What is different is it's got funding support through Title II. So Mills is engaged. He's compensated to be a part of it, and Rachel is also compensated to be a part of it. So that was something that we didn't have during the QLG time. We had citizens. That's right. That's the very different approaches of a CLFR sort of approach versus the QLG approach. And I want that dialogue to happen during our meetings so that we all understand what the implications of one approach versus
Well,
another.
this is different in that we're not talking about solely Forest Service land.
Right. That is true.
So the idea of having paid staff makes a lot more sense.
Good insight.
And in fact, the idea of, since the money source is different. I mean, the potential money source, if we put in a placeholder that covers the state water project watershed, that deals with forests and water in the way we understand it, and name it something else, Disneyland would be fine, as far as I'm concerned, because it makes it easier for me to bring in the environmental community as an alternative project to surface dams, which is what I'm sitting here for. I mean, in full disclosure, I'm sitting here representing the Environmental Water Caucus of the state of California. And I'll speak, we now don't know how to formulate a project. We understand that it's necessary and that map there with the additions from Lassen County and Sierra County is the state water project watershed. So if it's not going to happen here, it's going to be very hard for anybody to put it together anywhere and make it meaningful.
So very, very astute observation. The difference here is public and private lands are eventually on the board, whereas QLG very explicitly, very early said we are only focused on public land, national forest. So that's the difference. So then, and I don't know if we want to do this at this point in the agenda. It's a great question. That's probably something that we ought to pursue because at this point in time, proposals are
Time getting really short.
quickly. And so if we're going to have something moving forward, then we should work on that. So my thinking has been, in terms of the Fire Safe Council and in terms of water bond sort of projects, the notion being, what can we do to address those resource management strategies and those issues that are going to advance those issues of the water bond? Influencing yield. Influencing storage yield. But from Fire Safe Council, we don't do projects that fit that. We don't do them. Our projects are very much opportunistic. When a landowner wants to do it, they're not on scale. So I would almost say, I mean, not to say that it couldn't be, and maybe the funds get good. It's a very different beast to present a whole lot of landowners, such as the Fort Road project, where we were very successful. And we could build for that. But at this moment, if we're going to do something that's large and landscape, it's going to either be from private landowners or it's going to be from the national forest. Right. So that's where I say if we're going to submit something now, it would be coming from them. That's why I'm so pleased that both Super and Collins have been part of this process. Hopefully they'll be able to identify something, and we've been talking about it with this national forest as well.
So because I've got to run to the board off and on this morning, let them know what's gonna happen as I get over there. Just along the line of talking about projects. I recently acquired a crystal ball.
Oh,
That crystal ball is etched on the outside the world in the continents, but the point I'm trying to make is it's not a very good source to know what's going to happen in the future. And when I look at the projects, I kind of want to take some sideboards off because we were talking about the water storage ball. But we really don't know what's out there in the totality or maybe what may come up in terms of funding opportunities in the future. That's why the crystal ball thing. So in terms of looking at projects, certainly what I'm hearing is really good, but I would like to take some sideboards off and recognize that projects, ideas, problem solving, whatever it may be, keep it in light that we don't know what the future might hold for funding opportunities, and that by inclusion in the plan in some way, whether it's priority or another thing, that creates a healthy environment to try to get funds from a funding source because it's connected to the integrated regional water management plan for the source of water for the California Water Project. So I want you to think broadly about, don't focus on one. Some of them focus on one funding source, but focus on what it is, a project, a worthy project, and don't put sideboards on that there isn't a funding source to deal with it right now. I guess that's my message.
Wait,
Well, I just want to make a couple of comments about some of the things Mike said before we get off the subject. Is that if you want to get the public involved in any of this, you've got to put something in the notification that addresses them personally. From my experience with ADWAC running this since 2005, if you just put out something like was done for the meeting in Chester, nobody's going to show up. It has to be something that addresses them personally. Like whenever we were going to close off the causeway, we got like 300 people. When we were talking about the septic line running down the east shore, we got 300 people. When you talk about cloud seeding, we got a whole room full of people. When you put something in there like addressing the QLG stuff, nobody cared. Nobody showed up. The other thing is, I don't know how much it's going to address the water situation that's going on now, but I don't know how many of you are aware of it, but there's been something come up about the yellow frog in the river. All these years we've been waiting for the 2105 program to get approved and the DDR to come out and all that. After all that exercise, now there's a movement by an environmental group to stop that whole thermal curtain releasing the water down the river out of Lake Elsinore for the yellow frog.
okay. Yeah, just back to the crystal ball idea, you don't know.
I think the broader we think, it's better too. This isn't the only ship that's gonna sail in the next couple of years. It's money. We ought to be prepared for it, but there's others. I mean, I liken where we ought to go to sort of how Colorado, the Denver area evolved and Long Island Sound evolved. We had specific problems. They got a group together. The group came up with an annual project list and went through the annual projects for 10 years that had reached agreement internally before they got on the list. I think that's where we ought to go. And whatever we call it doesn't matter so much. But the QLG, when we started, it was federal. And this has got to be private and public. And I'm more concerned with quality of people than quantity. That,
Well, I agree.
it doesn't take many ship disturbers to get stuff done.
John, you know,
Okay, Ryan,
going to these meetings, the faces you see usually are the same ones. You know, it's like
and stay there.
over the 10 years that I've been involved in it, it's always you, it's, you know.
Okay, Ryan,
Just
go.
want to add, Randy mentioned taking sideboards off. I know that, you know, I actually saw the Utah Fire Safe Council too, but the Plutus has a list of projects on it, right?
Yeah.
Have we looked at those to see if some of those might fit?
The Lewis Fire Safe
Yeah. The list of projects
We're
that have
gonna
already
get-
been developed to help kind of.
Well, we have funded projects, and then we went through a process in March to solicit what other
Yeah,
entities
so
such
there's none
as
out
you
there,
guys are doing.
there's none out there that are like ready to go but are unfunded. So,
Not
okay.
not fire safety.
Yeah.
Well, we're having
Well, there's Zeke, I'm not sure. Mills was saying that there was a lot of proposals put in and some of them got funded and some of them didn't.
Right, we submitted 7 different projects to this state responsibility area, of which only 1 was funded.
So there's
those
6.
left of
Okay,
should
those are
be
6 that we should have.
maybe.
Those are community centric. It's that issue that I was saying.
I understand,
It doesn't
yeah.
buy as much from the standpoint of water.
Yeah. I understand.
Well,
Well, Neil has been talking to me about a project on my property, but I don't know if I'm gonna go along.
okay, so what I'm getting at is we do have projects. You know I looked at the handout that you guys had about what's going on in the Plumas for the next couple of years. You know, so those
The
are projects.
SOPA, you mean?
Yeah, but particularly projects that you were saying represent sort of landscape. I don't remember the names of them, but I have it in my pile. And I'll remind you, but projects that you had the NEPA done, they're going out to contract, they're in the process of being let. There's other ones that are a little further along. What we're trying to do is get that specific list, knowing that as we move forward and we get the nod, we're gonna be pulling in projects year by year. You know, so that's the idea here, and as long as they fit into this exercise we're gonna do later, which is how does it fit with the California Water Plan resource strategies, how does it fit with the California Water Plan goals and objectives, as long as we make that hook, and we have Burkhardt working on that forest water study that says you thin to 40% in this kind of zone, you're probably gonna get this kind of recharge. And, you know, that's the other paper we're doing is going through the literature. When we get into this baseline technical study, you can see all the papers we've been plowing through to show where the science is. So that's our kind of job on our side, but your job is to say, okay, these projects fit these criteria and we want them in the mix. Okay, go ahead, Michael.
Okay, and I'll end my contribution here. What you have to have to qualify for a statewide program is a scale. That these projects, Fire Safe Council projects, don't fit unless they're the first steps in an overall scale of a project that is meaningful to the people of California. The last thing the people in California seem interested in is the kind of projects that Ablac was talking about. But, you know, I mean, who cares about the east side of Lake Almanor in Los Angeles? How do you justify one Fire Safe Council program unless it's part of an umbrella of things that will be done that will generate benefits downstream?
So
And it doesn't matter whether or not the project is beneficial locally. The way it's going to be evaluated in, for instance, the new bill that's being circulated in California, at the state legislature, that is co-sponsored by Aqua, the big water managers group, which is to do thinning in order to generate water below the forested areas. So until there is a program, and you guys can call it what you want, but you're gonna have to give a region. I mean, it might not be this region, it might be the whole damn Sierra and the Cascades, but I don't think we're geared up to suggest that yet. It's these deadlines that are just outrageous.
So,
Be short.
because I'm gonna leave, I'm gonna jump in here pretty soon. One thinning project, whether it be 20 acres, cumes to another thinning project that's 100 acres, and if we're saying we get more water because we're doing thinning, downstream that might have an effect. One of the things that came out, and it was a pretty well-attended meeting in Portola, on the project development, is, you know, one of the ranchers said, well, what about weeds? And I'm like, well, okay, a weed takes up water that competes with your forage. Therefore, there is a project sitting there because you get more water for a productive use of the water rather than the weed. You can see that linkage. It's not as great as what Michael's talking about, but it does cue together.
It's the same thing as all of these off-site trees that are the fire hazard.
Right.
They're weeds.
They're weeds in a way. So that's why I even brought it up in this context.
I like that term.
Well, that's the language. As we get into these projects, we have to develop a language that resonates with the rest of the state, because we talk to each other. But when I was talking to the Environmental Water Caucus, they're doing a water supply policy paper, and they actually called me. Mike was out of town, and so we had a long talk, and they couldn't get the idea, the difference between good fire and bad fire. Could not get it. And so I finally said, well, a good fire crawls on the ground, a bad fire's up in the clouds, and it kills everything. And somehow the rhyme or whatever that was, they were like, okay, got it. I can sell that. That makes sense to me. And all the ways I was doing, I tried 10 different ways and I got nowhere. And so part of what we're doing here is, get the projects to us, but then we're gonna package them in ways that somebody down in the rest of the state goes, I get it, the 24% of the water goes into the sky instead of into the ground. All those kind of basic ideas that we talk to each other about aren't basic to people outside of here. So we've got two tasks. Well, one is the one I'm going to get into right now, which is just getting the documents and the science. Everybody goes, you just making this up? Where's your science? So if you go on our website, you'll see we piled hundreds of documents in there that said, you want science, we got science. And so one of the things we're doing is saying, yeah, we know how to justify for you people what we're actually going to be able to accomplish. So that's what this baseline technical study piece is about. The second piece is, how does your work tie into the California Water Plan? So we're going to get into that with those strategies and objectives and all those stupid boxes and lines that you had to fill out. There's a purpose to all of it, and we'll get it over with, and you don't have to go there again. But it's to tie your projects to this bigger picture, okay?
So before I interject, I look at this as kind of a brainstorming project, identification at this point. Again, I'm trying to take sideboards off and not focus too much on everything, get some good ideas down. Don't be afraid to put something down and, well, I don't know what it means in this. Get them down on paper. This is process will vet through this group, the other groups. So with that, I will try to return as soon as possible.
Good luck with that letter.
Yeah, that letter's critical.
The letter will be signed by me, Leah.
Great.
It'll probably go out later in the week.
Okay, it's got
We'll
to
get there
go.
by the 15th.
Okay, by the 15th, good. Okay, so as soon as we get this letter, it'll go out to you guys.
Okay, so for the Plumas, this is where we're sort of at, is as many of you know, we have an out-year program of work, 5-year out-year program of work. A lot of that is our projects that have not yet gone through the NEPA process. And so maybe I would be reluctant to recommend in the immediate future hitching a wagon to that pony. But knowing that that's our out-year program, and we have that capacity in the next 5 years. Sort of that's that landscape level, and that's why we're collaborating with Mike's group. Is we're really actually interested in getting this feedback on our out-year program of A, are we going in the right areas from the public's perception? B, are we managing for the right values? And as you all well know, many of our projects, they all have the fuels, forest health spin on them. We oftentimes don't have a water yield purpose in need, if you will. But that's not to say that some of these processes have certainly influenced our thinking on the interdisciplinary teams, and we're looking more and more at that. Now, the other piece of our program that folks like industries more familiar with is our timber sale program, which we fund usually through our appropriated dollars, and we'll continue to do that. And so when you look at our project, like say the Hayden project, that will be broken up into timber sales, but then there will also be service type work which our appropriated funding cannot necessarily cover. Now, my understanding though in our Forest Service involvement with some of these efforts is we are not we're not poised to be the project proponent or the PI, if you will. We are, in that sense, we're very much dependent on partners who see those pieces of our program of work and want to pick those up and be the proponent to make sure that work gets done. We were just sort of talking about it with the greenhouse gas reduction fund through CAL FIRE. It's a great example. Those funds are out there for interested parties in California to submit proposals for. You won't see the Forest Service though, or the Pumas submitting proposals to use that money. However, you'll see our partners submitting proposals to develop projects that are on public land. And so what's important for the forest is to cultivate those partners that will see those pieces of our program of work. And we're completely willing to share our program of work. In fact, we want that interaction with the public to see what's important to everyone to implement. But that is sort of a reality that sort of limits or constrains our capacity to react, especially to short-term deadlines. That's where I actually see Collins and SOBR and SPI and CHI and these private entities maybe having a little bit more capacity to react in a quicker time frame. But you can correct me if I'm wrong on that. But I think, and I heard somebody say that earlier, I think that's a great first step. But getting back to that, I think then we can bring in that public piece. And so it's not one project, it's this accretion of projects. So this is the first steps that are happening on private lands and maybe land trust lands or whomever. And then the public side or the Forest Service side of that can sort of show that breadth in the longer term by contributing our overall program of work, saying this is what's going to be funded through other funding streams as well, including our appropriated budget for our green program, something like that.
So thought I have the notes on that then is that what I heard, so you're not going to be a proponent for a given project and are looking for others. And so when I hear that, I think, well, maybe that's kind of the notion of stewardship contracts. Stewardship contracting, they're long-term, they're taken on by an outside entity. In other places, it's been the forest products industry. And so they work with you to develop that project. Oftentimes, the stewardship program from the Forest Service, I say oftentimes, but in reality, they're limited in a number of ways. One of those things is that they require third-party monitoring, but there's no funds for that. They you can't fund NEPA, if I remember correctly. So there's limited on. So there's some limitations, I think, but that may be something that we pilot through this process as we say, okay, this particular. Oh, there's another convergence here, and that is that the Forest Service has already identified a certain number of priority watersheds on the Pumas National Forest. So we look and see those priority watersheds, and we say, where is the convergence with a given landowner to focus on that priority watershed and talk and see if there is potential for a long-term arrangement in that particular watershed. And we identify those, and we look to pilot through this process.
Those are all, and if where you have a gap, where it's an institutional thing that's holding things up, that's a project too. Those are barriers. So, okay, so I'm gonna move everybody along because we're gonna have to.
Is that listed on the website also, the watershed prioritization part of it?
It's on the.
Where is
The
that?
priority watershed is it's a Plymouth National Forest. I just received a link from Ryan yesterday, so I could
They're
send that out.
prioritized by watershed.
Yeah, it's the
No,
watershed.
it's just a group of priority watersheds.
Where the federal dollars go into it, and then they change after a while. So a lot of what's gonna happen is we compile all these things, is we're gonna be working with the other databases, like Mike's pulling together some things for his process, and Ryan has his process. A lot of this will be linking in, because what we have to do on the water side is show that, if they say yes, we can do it. You know, and that's the number one thing that we're doing with these projects is, okay, we got work for next year, and that's Ryan, so when you say those projects aren't important, they are important.
They
You know,
are.
the ones that are, you're ready to let, that are, those are the ones that tell everybody, okay, if you got storage dollars this next year, where would they go? And they would go into your existing work and maybe some enhancements.
And they would carry the costs that you can't get funded.
Oh,
That would be
understood,
the-
they're just not ripe at this time for,
And then-
for a proposal
And then
here.
people, well, they're gonna wanna know what's deeper ready and not.
Well-
So your out-year work isn't quite as ready, but that doesn't matter, as long as they see the pipeline and that it's coming from private and public and community lands, whatever it is, they can see the scale that they wanna fund.
Well,
That's,
And
I
one of
think that's what we need to dial you guys into, because we already have those 6 priority, actually, now I think we have 8 priority watersheds. And each watershed has a watershed action plan where we've already identified actions that, need to happen before we can deprioritize that watershed.
And the reason I started this in the context of the Quincy Library Group stuff is because I know you've got more NEPA data on this forest than anybody's got for any damn project they're proposing. Because of the history of the last 15 years, but for, what's it been, 3 now? 2?
Sure.
Something like that?
Sure.
So all of that data dealt with the same kinds of things which this money would be spent on. My next thing is database categories today. Just looking at those database categories. There is almost nothing on that list that wasn't addressed in the 15 years of the Quincy Library Group program.
okay, so I'm gonna move us through the agenda and we'll pick this up over and over, but this was hopefully a beginning discussion on why we need your projects, even though some of them might not be as ready as others, and we wanna show scale.
To answer Ryan on that one, I think ready means a name and an acreage.
You know, we're
Right.
talking, this thing
Right.
is simple.
Oh, yeah,
You guys can't even believe how simple it
we
is.
have tons of, project names and acreages, they're just in various stages.
Right, right.
But I think the strength is in those out years, they'll be able to show sort of like contributing match, if you will.
Right.
Like a great example that we haven't discussed, we talked about the green program, the watershed assessment. We also have the post-fire restoration priority that we've been handed. And so we already have a slew of projects that are being developed, some of which do have a water focus and are already funded. So that would be, those are great projects that we could use as, say, match, if you will, for a similar landscape. Here's a project on X, Y, and Z landowners' land. They propose to do this, but look at all of this other work that these other landowners are doing that would complement that.
And the water molecule doesn't care if it falls on federal land or state land. I mean, if,
Okay, Terry,
I was just gonna help you maybe to lead in a little bit, but
You
also
know,
just,
still on the first
yeah,
slide.
well, and just a reminder with the projects, because I think, and this happened in my work group that I was working on too, is that we really, like Randy said, are really in that brainstorm stage right now. Don't get hung up on like, we're looking at a 20-year possibility plan kind of idea. What projects do you see that in the next 20 years and issues? So really just throw it out there and get it in there to the plan. We can figure out where it's all going to fit into some box somewhere. So at some point, whether that's next year or in 15 years, but I think right now what the group is really struggling to get from everybody is just get those ideas out in 2 weeks. We need a slew of projects, and we all have to name right now 20 issues in the watershed. Whether we can do them tomorrow because they're paper ready or not doesn't matter at this point. We just want to get those identified, and you guys are the experts to do it. So I think that's what. And I think everybody here has shown that they have a lot to contribute. But I think that's what, yeah, what we're just don't need to worry about like whether.
Okay, Trina's next, and then I gotta move you guys for you.
So just to put it out there, in the last meeting that we had, the reason that,
The big group.
yeah, the big group, we put those dates out there, but with the short form, our thought at this point in the discussion was that this is a chance to get people to push them to figure out what their project is and to get it done. But also they don't have to fill out the long form if it doesn't look like it's likely to get funded at that time, depending on the priorities that we set. But if people did do the long form and it's a valid project, they have that developed and they can pursue other funding, or at the next funding cycle, their project will be ready. So just look at it as an opportunity to push yourself forward and to get funding one way or another.
Okay, so to wrap this up, I invite you to go to featherriver.org, check on the documents tab, and you'll see two things. You see all these baseline studies that we've been doing all this time, and to show the science that's behind the work we're proposing, and you'll also see the form that you can download to get the project in and who to send it to if you don't fill out something today. Now the gaps that we have in the baseline study, we're still taking anything that you've got, we'll keep putting them in there, but I think you'll be really pleased, especially on the forestry side, how much we've been able to compile and pull together for you. But these are the missing pieces so far, and I don't know how much of them really apply to us, but the overall program is missing what they call conjunctive water use, recreation planning, and water supply, which is not particularly an emphasis area for this group, but I was just sort of obligated to tell you that. So anyway, here's the technical study. I encourage you to look at it at your time, when you have time. And Zeke will be taking us through what we've been doing to map some of these areas and some of these potentials that we have and how we're prioritizing our projects by strategy. The other thing we have to pay attention to if we're doing the statewide issue is that we're taking care of the forest because it needs to be taken care of. We're not just chasing water. We're not just working an aspen forest in the 20-inch zone is as important as an aspen forest on the 60-inch zone. So part of what we're doing with these strategies is showing if somebody from another state or a Bay Area environmentalist wants to see if we're really just chasing water with this and we're just pretending to take care of the forest, they can hook in on our map and they can see that we've got projects in all these different strategies. These 7 that we were talking about, we're allowing fire to be reintroduced because we got fire buffers. We're taking care of ridgeline ignitions. We're taking care of critical habitat buffers. We're doing all these things. And when those dots go on the map, they'll be able to see we're not just doing one kind of project. And so that's another reason why we're going through these, like, they look like ridiculous exercises now, but later it's really going to matter. That's all we can tell you. To show people who might not be interested in digging into the weeds with us, but they can look on this website and they can see what we're doing and that it's a balanced program for forest health and water across this region. So this is why we're going through this exercise today, looking to these different projects. In your packet, you will see these same old resource management strategies that we've been talking about for 2 meetings. They're about, halfway through here. They look like this. We had the chart where everybody kind of agreed which ones we were going to take. We picked our big 6. The management group wanted us to go back and look at some of these other ones. And so as you'll see, when we went through, the chairs went through this resource management strategies issues work chart that's a little bit later. First you got this thing where what did all the work groups do? Then you've got this section of what does the California Water Plan say your resource management strategies are? And then John and Mike and I got together and said, okay, what are our issues? Remember last time we brainstormed our basic issues? And how do they fit into this? And that's this thing that's got the X's and the little triangles. And so that's where we're going to kind of end up. Again, we go from the big picture, the California Water Plan, to what we want to do, to down to specifics. How does it fit our issues? So that's kind of what we're doing. So that's the rhetoric about why we're doing all this. Why are we doing goals? Why are we doing plans? Because we're after state water money. And that's what they want our resource management strategies tied to. So let's see. Okay, so we did 6, there's a whole bunch of them that nobody selected. So the steering committee wanted us to go back and look at again. If we're happy with what we've got, we just report back that we're sticking with them. I know that floodplains said that they weren't gonna get heavy into forest because we were doing it, and they picked up what, recharge areas, or they picked up another one?
Recharge and sedimentation.
You know, and then the municipal group's really focusing, and the ag group like us is probably focusing on what they've got. They've got a full plate doing what they're doing. So the work groups are doing different things with these kind of suggestions from the steering committee. So when we go through this, here's the ones we picked. Okay, these are the 6 that we picked. And you know, as you can see, some of them are overlapping with other work groups, and some of them are specifically ours, such as forest management. So unless we have, you know, new thoughts about this, we're gonna kind of stick with these 6.
MFW again?
That's meadows and floodplains and water bodies, that's another work group. And they picked, you know, there are overlaps between some of these issues.
There better be.
Yeah, because this is all kind of hooked together. So again, we have a chance to revisit these one more time, and then we're kind of done with it. But we'll, you know, they want, so this is what we're doing, this big exercise is we're taking our issues, that's this chart right here.
Page,
Huh?
page,
We don't have, do we
Yeah,
have
we do.
page?
we got page.
Okay, you tell me what pages. You're
We're in the
on.
middle on the right. We're on the bottom.
Page number.
I don't see it.
Not
Okay, so it's, we're all on this
About
one.
halfway through.
Yeah,
Well,
no,
I'm
that's
glad.
fine.
It's right before this tonight.
We will suggest that they get pages, that would be great.
Yeah.
But this is what we're gonna be working on today, where we finally pull all this together. It's the one you and John and I worked on?
After the blank page.
After the blank page.
The intentional one?
No, the other.
Where, go back one slide. You went. Where is number 2 located?
That's in the packet, and it's on the table, and it's on our website, featherriver.org, under documents.
Okay.
And that's where you can download the one that you can actually fill in and ship in. Did that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay.
It is right here in front of me,
Yeah,
evidently. Conceptual project
Yeah,
summary form
yeah,
was,
there-
was put there by Randy
Yeah.
because he wanted me to fill that out.
So if you wanna fill something out today and leave it, we'll input it. If you wanna get on the website and do it that way. But, the coordinators will be following up with you folks to make sure that we get some nice
Why don't we
pile.
get this other stuff out of the way and then,
Okay, so this is again, this whole process that we're going through, and we're really trying to get a final, pile of projects, at least for this year, done by October. And we're doing the first deadline is June 1st. Okay. Okay, so, what I was hoping, Zeke, were you gonna run us through what you've been doing with the website and the maps?
Sure. Yes, do you want to take a little time to look at the maps, like have people stand around, or are we gonna do that at a later time in the meeting?
Do you have it so that you can project it?
The maps?
Uh-huh.
You got a high resolution projector.
That's projected.
Okay,
Uh,
then go ahead and take some time to put
Okay.
them up, because it'd be nice for people.
Right, and then, so Paul, does a lot of the mapping for us, and so, Paul and I are gonna kind of work interchangeably on this project. If I can't make it, he'll be here, vice versa. This map, we're taking a stab at the map, at some of the ideas that you threw out initially as far as like where's the water, wildland, urban interface, ridge lines, snow catchment areas, etc. So we've got some maps here that we should probably put up. This map, this shows the Quincy Library Group's project proposals. It shows facts data, so forest activities that have been tracked in the forest project database, basically Forest Service existing projects.
Those are all completed projects within the last 10 years. And then,
There was some private lands projects included.
yeah, we've got Fire Safe Council projects on there as
So
well as,
it's the Fire Safe Council map brought up to date, basically.
pretty much, yeah, with the addition of the Quincy Library Group, proposed
Which was on there.
projects.
Quincy
Oh, okay,
Library
was
stuff
that?
was on there.
That was on there, yeah, so those are all on there, completed projects.
You got some
And then,
NRCS.
so the background, yeah, I kind of approach this coming from a fire background. I approach this as you would a Fire Safe Council map. So the background is kind of a rough hazard assessment, slope aspect, your steep slopes, your south-southwest aspects, your WUI, all overlaid on each other and added up to get you a low to high kind of a hazard priority. So you'll see the areas that are coming out in the red and orange are those areas that are close into the WUI that have steeper slopes and south-southwest aspects. And like I said, this is a first stab at it, and listening to everybody talk now, I can see there's definitely some more information we need to get. For example, the planned projects, I can see how that's going to be really important for you guys to be laying out your future projects and tying those all in there together. And then the priority watersheds, I think that'll be really helpful to have up there. So I need to incorporate more of the Forest Service proposed data. What we have here is mostly completed stuff. And then I'd also like to get as many suggestions from you guys as, layers and priorities that you'd like to see on there that we could combine with this to get a better sense of where you.
One thing I don't think we have on here is the Fire Safe Council compiled projects done on private timberland.
No, we do not.
We haven't added that layer in here
Yeah,
yet.
so that's another, yeah.
I think one thing we're looking at is like, well, how many layers do you want to have on each map? Do you want to have 4 different maps that are easier to interpret, or one map that has everything? We tend to lean towards having multiple maps.
I think that would be good.
Yeah.
And we'll have a way on the website for people to hone in on this,
Oh, yeah, we can put these as PDFs up there that you can download.
because
We can also put them up as a map that somebody can browse interactively on the website. So
So I always key in on the west shore of Lake Elmore. There's a bunch of acreage over there. And it seems like it's in excess of the work that the Forest Service has done. It seems to include some of the stuff that Collins did,
Yeah.
Fire Safe did. But you're saying it didn't.
We're not showing the private timberland projects on this map.
yeah, so Collins wouldn't be on there.
Okay.
and we're saying that we want to show that.
Yeah, definitely. That's something that I'm going to put on my list and get on there for the next round of mapping. And then these maps over here are kind of showing, we was asked to kind of get a sense of where snow storage areas might be. So we looked at the opposite, the north facing aspects.
Maybe you can sort of show them or
Well,
something.
I mean,
So we could
Or
just
get
walk
up,
around.
yeah,
yeah.
let's get up and look at
And
these.
typically, I took a look at it above 5,000 feet and thought that was kind of giving us a little too much, so I narrowed it down to 6,000 feet. They're basically the same thing, but this one is showing above 5,000 feet, this one's showing above 6,000 feet. It also has a fire history, the gray, as well as the yellow-legged frog critical habitat is on there as well. And red fir, we thought was a decent indicator of where there might be snow collecting.
Yes.
And it kind of lines up pretty well. Green, yellow fir.
Is that this?
Yeah, and then it's one more bigger.
Big fire.
One map that shows everything, but then about 4 or 5 different maps that cover the thing.
Yeah, I had one map that showed everything and it just kind of.
Flat.
Look like everything's there, right?
Exactly. That's why I
Oh,
took
this is
Louis to
great.
find all that instead of
Yeah, this is
put
really
each
good.
layer on.
What's your name?
So yeah, if you have a question or ideas or something,
Yeah, these maps are
Markers.
Yeah, they're fantastic, because people are visual, when they're checking in on us, they're gonna look at these maps, number one.
The other thing is, this is, for a water person, this is the most important thing we would ever see, because they're scared to death that in the state watershed, we're not gonna have any snow. Right?
You know how
So,
much runoff we'd have if we clear cut all these? There'd be plenty of water for everybody.
We're not-
For about 2 years.
Good thing you, my wife's out here.
Anybody has any ideas or feel free to pick up
they're at least sophisticated enough to know
Any additional layers?
fire, flood, mud.
Right on that.
But what we're saying is in the fires, in the snow zone, you might have a different forest strategy than you do in the lower zone. You know, and that's where those little circle areas where you can, those cuts where you can collect a lot of snow, but keeping your big trees, so you shade it, and all that sort of thing.
Well, these are the best places to keep big trees.
Right.
Because of the
Yeah,
fire.
they had an extended, I kind of.
And then they found over there, I think it was a really northwest forest land, and they were drawing them on upper southwest facing slopes, and people they carve.
Yeah, right. And does it follow this, what they call the
Right.
basically the buffer around your
Lower north facing slopes.
That's all, okay, great. That's good, because that's something that I saw. It didn't seem to look pretty good.
Is absolutely critical here
Based on.
because
Oh, no, we don't need fire.
if
Alright.
this
All we need is
goes.
for the snow.
And then as far as fire sheds,
Right.
and that is about, okay.
Elevation difference.
These are the HUD.
The timing
Some people have been
is
using
comes
HUD as
through
kind of
this
delineation
system.
for a fire shed.
So
Out of the fire.
anything you
If you
can
get
do
sort of a, fire
to
station in those
retain
areas.
as much
And
of
they're
this
pretty
as
decent
possible.
sized units for planning.
Bigger trees,
Right.
extended space,
So,
kind of thing.
yeah, so basically it's the watersheds and where it works. So, yeah.
Just because you're supposed to snow, me and Patty made a couple of them.
Not always.
Because if, you'll still lose it here quicker,
And then
but if you can store it, start storing it longer in meadows and in
We were
meadows.
all that bullshit up there.
And it just goes on, I'm just gonna deal with the worst. You're gonna have the worst.
I was involved in
Yeah,
the
Long-term.
but it's newer than what I do.
That.
Anyway, oh,
Oh,
that's probably the same stuff.
To get into
Yeah.
how soon
It's
you
pretty
go
old.
by
Yeah, I was
that.
involved in a big carbon thing.
In some meadows.
And,
Yeah.
what's beneficial to collection is seen as theft by these people.
That's what I'm getting at, is if you increase storage capacity here, you also improve.
Any additional layers,
All
make
these additional, make the cattle ranch,
whatever.
Yeah,
Anything.
and
It's just the,
these people
the
see
private
cattle ranchers.
Right,
as-
but as you increase the storage here, you increase storage.
Yeah.
And that's what we've got.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, like.
That's why-
So I'm gonna have to say, I'm gonna, there are only big trees out here because there's more snow, that's not really around. Very
What it really is between the groups, like those meadows and all that stuff.
Yeah.
We need to show that sort of.
And the picture you got on
Yeah.
And I'll give you an example, we just got funded to do a bunch of projects up here. Okay, I can thin all around and also Shrine Street. And it can increase, now I can increase the storage on the hill that feeds into the meadow, that feeds into the system that keeps trickling down the hill.
I'm a board member of
Yeah, so you know,
So
you get the idea.
You're not signing this MOU
Or, you know.
because.
Well, I was just curious, yeah, it looks like the private lands are excluded.
But there's
Yeah.
meadows and forest lands.
So, yeah, so, but, yeah, we so these are the proposed projects for the Quincy Library.
But we can't work it out.
But
And then the pinks.
Okay, and the other thing as you know.
Completed, yeah, so the next step I wanna do, just erase what's been done, unless they've been done for more than 10 years now, they probably need to be revisited, so. People in there, and then, yeah, so
We're
Forest Service,
showing
the activity ones here,
The reason
those
we
are
have the
Forest
forest group
Service.
taking on meadows.
And like I said, I approached fire and lighting perspective, so it all has to do with fuels, right, basically.
Right. Oh, that's a good place to start.
Yeah, right. And then this background, low to high, we're looking at, like I said, the steep slopes, so space for aspects and so areas.
Yeah.
And so,
right along the river.
in our letter, she was saying, we talked
Calls
about
it pretty
transition.
well. I originally had to way on there, but
We
I
are
thought it
basically
good
keeping
job.
this from running off, and we're part of
And
it.
the movie I used to what was your name?
Jay Francis. I'm from college.
Oh, okay. Oh, great. Yeah, and that's trying to get.
Well, that's why I was wondering, when you said you had the fire safe information, we submitted multiple times to the fire safe. So we've got the fire safe layer.
And I made, because what I just about was fire, their fire safe council projects. I said, well, I probably have to try to do it. And I didn't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of 80 and FCI and
Okay, so you guys are part of it.
They don't have to share.
I thought they shared on that, the fire safe council.
I thought they do, that would be
Maybe,
great.
maybe they did.
So we have to figure out how to store this.
I mean, we can definitely get their parcels.
Yeah.
That's not a problem.
You know what I mean? Or just they wanna stand back.
When you put these on the
They haven't given up on the
website in
idea.
PDF format, are they,
Okay, so,
what's that?
Yes.
Yes.
You can put on top.
Yeah.
I can do that.
So we'll
Yeah,
see.
and-
I don't usually, because it just, it increases the file size a little bit, and I'm not sure that people are using that. But if you want to use it,
We
that way I
use
can
them
do
all
it.
the time.
okay, so
Yeah.
that
That events program. Yeah, it's like,
Yeah.
and so that way, when you're out on the ground and trying to distinguish where you are out there.
Yeah, yeah, that's what the fire service is for, all their field observers.
Yeah.
Although they're trying to do that, Park Online collector app.
But people, yeah, people outside of our area are not, so tell us what that is.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, thanks, Paul. Yeah, thank you.
It's rare, like in American Fire, you have the rim fire, you have the king fire. They tend to stay within one major range. The king fire doesn't burn, I mean, it burns really quicker.
Take a stab at where.
The upper Americans are like, right? But it didn't need to get down, it didn't leave the American River Basin. So they make it go on the next one. It's because they don't have you for all slow. And it's hard for the fire to get to there, and down canyon here, but then we tend to take red and north slope before they're down. So that's kind of landscape scale, what it's like, you can look at like the hot states, planning waters.
But it is,
You know, it's just, it's big, you know, it's big fire doesn't be out north.
at this, at a certain altitude. That's all.
You know, start, yeah, so this is not just investigate further. So like, look at the six fire.
What is this one, Charlie?
What? What this one's got on it is, the first thing we would want to show in a conceptual project is, you've been doing this, and there's NEPA history, and there's,
There's a QLG project.
yeah, basically, and the fire safety project, and whole collaborative effort. I mean, we could use a map like this to light up that room, because it's everything that the IRWM is supposed to do. And that the IRWM came along at a precise time, and so we're shifting the federal collaboration into one with the state and hopefully the counties. And Senator Feinstein worked on this project, and this is what she accomplished. And, I mean, light them up. And
So the one question I asked you.
I guess placeholder is what we need, so that thing we put in front of me,
You have this little thing.
we just need to write something down. And then it captured
So when people send in their project, you guys will look
all
at
of
top 3 lines.
history, we just don't say the words what's in it. Except
Well,
Parker Feinstein.
I want those tips, but then when they dig into it, and they get a description. And that's to me what the times.
They change the name.
Yeah. part of this, what's that little description was. So one of the things I was asking them to do, because I'm stuck where it's fun, so when they get into like, okay, where are we going with this?
So the
then I
Forest
can weigh in
Service
and
has
go, well,
got
per from our
a
mapping people,
10-year program
you know, this is the framework that
lined
really
up.
tells people the
Their
most about
problem
where
is
them and all these details.
they
that
can't
don't
fund
really
the pace and
matter.
scale they need,
Yeah,
but
kind of,
we
you know, so
could,
it's more just like, okay, here, this is a
take
forest
on
thing,
some
now I
of
have 2 or 3
Brian
lines, because I know when I
Dolly's,
checked in your other ones, you had a few
proposal
lines on there.
to do
And so what I want you guys to
biomass.
think about is
So we have
how do we
someplace to
lift
take
out
the
of these
material,
conceptual forms
and
3 or 4
the Forest
things
Service
that
can
you think
sell
are
the
really
material,
important,
lower
that
the
somebody
price,
clicks on.
and the state can pay for the biomass. And there's energy funds, and there's.
Okay, so why don't you think about that rather than what you think is next, because a map with all kinds of things sticking out doesn't mean anything, but telling people, we'll probably have a navigation tool finally,
Well,
that
part
goes,
of
here's
it
what you have
is
to done, this is how you get to this is how you get to that, but I'm counting on that's very important. Well, you know, not all the the project proposals tied to the strategies, tied to our initial forest water balance. You know,
Storytelling, like, so we take all the projects and deal with, and we start talking about them to help.
for people that, I'm thinking about monitoring, for people that are like,
Sure.
and
one way,
so how do we
So
plan
the,
and find out? Yeah, so
the
if they're under
scale
the
of
strategies,
the
and you're saying
problem
your
has
critical
got to be
habitat,
scaled up
what habitat are we
to
talking about?
deal
Are we talking
with
about a meadow edge?
what
Are we
yours,
talking about a
I mean,
riparian forest? We don't have to go into great details what it means, but probably if we categorize those kind of strategies. So again, somebody can make sure we're not chasing water.
Right,
We're not just
that's part of the program.
That's part of the program. They looked at me and I go, yeah,
that really takes up water for your crops, or your forage, and that's important.
That's what I'm saying, by itself, it's just
And
causes
it is,
and just by itself.
we gotta protect these lakes from exotic species.
Is it really balanced, really?
DWR understands that immediately because they've got them all over. I mean, it's not that the people downstream are ignorant. It's that we don't have to talk to them.
Well, here's the, you know, one of the this project is to protect packs, this project is to protect communities. It can be just those 7 strategies.
Let's go away, like flush the toilet. They go someplace I'm not worried about. That's going away right now. No, that's why there's something coming out of the toilet is why there's something coming out of your tap. Yeah. You know, and I said that for years. People don't think about that.
I'm not
too sure developers do. Only as an impediment. Now, person.
So that's, yeah, so that's true. Then that, you know, it's the accountability.
There's a cultural issue. So the idea is you go immediately with this map from these people have got a pie in the sky idea to these people have been
Yeah, private timber
Now,
stuff.
Private timber stuff that they.
frankly, my problem.
Yeah.
We should
We
be.
have it, have it.
Because they, I mean, they're doing
We're
stuff.
not through this yet. Correct. And so last night.
Okay, you guys, are we mapped out yet?
Right, and then we can.
You got more to do.
Well, they'll give us stuff, but
And then we gotta have
the main purpose of the work.
Right? 11:15, okay, so we've got from now to 11:15. I can see I'm not. Okay, you guys, let's regroup here.
Grab a seat.
Okay. Okay, so there's a couple things that I missed, all right? Is we didn't do introductions, So we'd like to go around and do introductions, but also give me some kind of gut feeling on these maps. You know, what do you think where are we, what needs to happen next? So,
Carl Phelps, chairman of the Floodplains Meadows Workgroup and chairman of Log of the old AMWAC.
over in the Almanor Basin.
And on the maps, what we found out during back in 2006 or something like that, we generated maps for what we were doing. We needed a map that covered everything, and we needed 4 or 5 sub-maps that separated things out so that to address people's particular interests. Otherwise, it was bad.
Ryan, are we doing introductions?
Yeah, we are,
So,
finally.
I'm Ryan Hilburn. I work with WM Beatty and Associates out of Susanville.
And what's your gut feeling on these maps? Or?
I only looked at one.
Okay, all right.
Well, I mean, from my perspective, we put too much on a map, we just get lost. So.
Okay, so get the main thing and then dig into these maps and what they mean.
Right.
Okay.
Paul Evans, your GPS.
And he's the guy that we talked to
The maps, I
about
think the
the
maps are awesome.
Okay.
I'm Zeke Lunder, Deer Creek Resources, same as Deer Creek GIS, but we don't want to get pigeonholed as map geeks, although we are. I'm a Westwood native and been working in the woods up here since about 1995.
I'm Ryan Tompkins. I'm the forest silviculturist for the Plumas. Maps, great, good display of information. One thing is I think we have some duplicative, processes that, because we're working with your brother, we could talk about. Through the CFLR, we're developing very similar maps, so it'd be nice to try to coordinate them, get them all.
That was the idea. Yeah, we should expand what we can do instead of duplicate it.
Yeah.
Very glad you're here because the supervisor's office at the Plumas is kind of, I guess we have a new supervisor acting, started Monday.
We do have a new acting that started Monday. I anticipate he'll probably be here for another 3 or 4 months on detail. He's from the Washington office. His name is Chris French. He's, I think, the deputy director for forest management. So it's great to have someone who is interested or has a resource management background. Yeah, you're gonna have a hard time getting rid of me. So
good.
Be here for a while.
Good.
Hopefully.
Okay, Mike.
Mike Eloso, University of California Cooperative Extension, Plumas and Cedar Counties.
And our chair.
Trina Cunningham, I'm with the Mighty Summit Consortium, and I'm on the steering committee for the urban. And as far as maps go, tribally, tribes are interested in all of the watersheds that are ancestral homeland, and so we're really interested in working with private landowners as well as federal people in looking at water health. And so the maps, it would be nice to see, if it's possible, to see which lands are owned privately, if that's okay with people, and if PG&E also, just so we know what we're working with.
Yeah, I think, doesn't CFRLA, they're doing a public-private land map, not breaking down private?
Yeah, I think we
Yeah, so, and that ties into our fire buffer strategy, which is one of our 7 strategies, to have enough room between private and public landowners so you can actually do some prescribed fire and not have it get away.
Right, and like this really small parcels, maybe less than 40 or 20 acres, just have, if they're massive, just have it. You don't have to individual each one.
We'll bring a map to the next meeting that has the major landowners, so
Yeah.
Beatty, STI, so for anyone we'll take the county parcel ownership and break it down by, anyone that's got over, 5,000 acres or something.
So the Plumas County General Plan map is here. One thing it doesn't show, because we blanketed all the forest lands with a forest designation, you can't find the federal and private ownership on this map, because even though we have no impact on the federal lands in terms of our zoning, we still zoned it. It was zoned before, we just carried it over to the present day. So it gives you some idea of the private ownership in the valleys, because that's really where the forest designation doesn't apply, but it doesn't show you the private. it'll give you an idea of the forest resources of the county.
But again, this other map that's gonna be developed is gonna be really helpful for showing that we have a variety of lands and managers and, you know, that sort of thing. Okay, I'm Leah Wells, and I work for the county as a water policy analyst and help Randy with the letter that you're gonna see this next week. And I'm also coordinator for this work group and coordinate with the other coordinators on the 4 work groups for the plan.
So I'm Randy Wilson, I'm County Planning Director and Co-Manager of the Flood Control and Water Conservation District, i.e. I have all the planning to the south side. And for this project, I am the overall project manager for the county.
I'm Mike Jackson. I'm a water lawyer by trade. I presently represent Restore the Delta in the 7 Delta counties. I represent the California Water Impact Network, a statewide organization centered in Santa Barbara. I represent the California Sports Fishing Protection Alliance. I have for 30 years, and I represent Aqua Alliance, which is the environmental group that does a lot of the work in the Sacramento Valley in regard to water, groundwater in particular. I'm a board member of Plymouth Corp, and I am was a 15-year member of the Quincy Library Group. The most important thing I've seen since I came in the room today is that map. And the first overlay, because that is the State Water Project map. And then the overlay of Plymouth County that would go on top of it explains why Plymouth County and this IRFM is probably the most important one in the state to the rest of the state.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm John Sheehan. I was director of Plymouth Corporation for 20 years, but I'm retired. I'm president of the trustees of the college, and I'm vice chairman of this committee. What else? That's enough.
That's enough. And what's your view on that?
I'd like to see the 2 things added to that map that we've been living with for good or ill for the last 20 years, and that is the DFPZ network as defined in the 1993 legislation, which is the only general plan we've been operating under after all. And the off-base and deferred areas, just for reference purposes. And I can be talked out of that. But one of the tasks we have to do, interesting. One of the tasks we have to do in the relatively short term is take a look at the off-base and deferred again that came from 92, 93. And say, okay, what should we be hanging with in terms of timber production and what shouldn't we? Ryan talked earlier about that they're doing an analysis on the Middle Fork. Well, we didn't have to worry about the Middle Fork because you couldn't put a tow in the Middle Fork under QLG. It was off base. You couldn't do any scheduled serious forestry or forest sales in the Middle Fork. So, there's lots of areas that I don't think we need to contest them, but we need to talk about them.
Well, that I think can be picked up on the their work. But everybody's clear with putting the old network up there.
Well, is it on
It's
there?
one of
We've
our
got
strategies.
We've got all the polygons from the alternative 2 from the final EIS.
Well, that's probably it.
Okay.
Mike, are you happy with that? That is it.
Okay.
John, we could just put the fire history for the last 10 years on there, and that would pretty much show the.
Yeah.
That's good. Okay, fire history, we heard that one.
And one other piece, and that is there's a data set that was developed by the Fire Safety Council with the help of industry that shows all the complementary fuels work that was done by industry over the last 10 years or 15 years.
I
Not
think,
necessarily all the work, but all the complementary fuels.
Yeah, we've got that layer from Fire Safe Council, just didn't make it on this.
okay, so what's important about that is showing that we have the capacity. We've been at this for a long time. We've all been doing work for a long time. This is not gonna scare us to keep going down
This
this
is not
road.
pie in the sky.
You know, so
And
that's
you
why
can look
these,
into the history.
And, you know, that comes with a narrative too that hasn't been yet developed that says, oh, by the way, in the Feather River watershed, 250,000 acres got done.
okay, and
By
Steve and I
all
were
parties,
talking about
and
that.
it's kind of like kitty.
And we only barely stayed even with the fires.
Well, I think that's your strength, region-wide, is in the Sierras, the most work has been done on landscape level here. And so, given that, 20% rule of thumb that you have your landscape treated to be able to manage large fires, well, that 20% is not a static 20%, it's a temporal 20%, right? So that means you constantly have to be doing more and more work, because as time goes on, some of that work starts to lose its effectiveness.
Right.
Yeah,
You have to go
about
back
10
on.
years,
Yeah.
depending on where you're at.
Well, and that's another point, one of the things I've been thinking about for projects, because you have to do the useful life
Right.
of a project when you're competing, but we're gonna go back in a period of time, all projects have maintenance. And so what we want to start talking about is what is that second, then we get some water benefits for the work you already did.
Right.
Okay, so if you're going back in and you're tuning it up, we get to count that as far as recharge areas that we have actually reestablished as recharge areas. They're not thickets radiating water into the sky. So again, why this ties back into projects is we want to have a project. We have a strategy called post-burn. Well, we haven't got a maintenance strategy, really. But we're just assuming what we tell everybody else is everybody does maintenance. And these projects, some of them, we're going back in and maybe we're taking fire, maybe we're doing some other things, but we're tuning these projects up, and that's how you get the water benefits over the quote, useful life of a project that are comparable with a dam, for example, because we're always up against these dams. And they say, oh, these dams are perfect for 100 years, but what we know in California is nobody's put any money into these dams, and they all need a lot of work. We don't put money into maintenance. So we want to be really clear that some of these older projects that are ready for a tune-up, we want to have them in our project mix.
And we not only want to be clear, we want to be smart, so that the pitching it as the MIDO Forest Service private landowner maintenance budget would be sexy as you can imagine in terms of the state of California.
So I just heard, look at old project work and see if any needs to be
Retune.
looking for projects.
Right.
In looking for price.
And then we get,
Sideboards are off, guys. Get it
and
out
then
there.
we get some nice water benefits for the amount of work that you're doing.
Well, I think look at maintaining previous fires too. So like Story is 15 years old now. Are there prescribed burns we can do to clean up
Right.
deadfall from those fires?
Okay, we're still trying to do interjections.
Ryan McKillop, Forester was Silver company for about the last 20 years or so. And I do the GIS and mapping for them, kind of self-taught, but maps, I love maps, they're great. I can stare at them for hours. I like how they're broken up into different maps. I might add, maybe for that map, that there's a big chunk of Butte County there. About 2/3 of that's timberland, I think.
Right.
And so the Butte Fire Safe Council and the Forbes-Town Fire Safe Council have done a lot of project work. We could look into getting on the map.
I think it's on the map.
Is it?
Is it that redwood?
No, we don't have anything for Butte County private
Oh,
projects.
okay.
Same thing.
Yeah, that would be a Forest Service.
Same thing with the last
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, we're definitely missing those other pieces. You're right.
round mountain, that was reservoir base. So, I'm a forester not named Brian.
Yeah, that's true.
Jay Grants is forest manager for Collins Pine Company in Chester, and I like maps as well. Those are real pretty.
Any suggestions, Jay?
Well, they've already been talking about adding the private lands, and also, as I mentioned, Paul, a lot of us are using devices in the woods. If you have geo-referenced PDF maps, they're very handy to be out in the field. So even though it takes a little bit more storage capacity to make them geo-referenced, it's not that much more, I don't
It's
think.
pretty standard anymore if you output it from our GIS, it's geo-referenced.
GeoPDF.
Okay, you guys understood all that?
Yeah, of course.
That's how we all.
I couldn't do it. I understood.
Burkhard?
Yeah,
It was English,
Wait,
right?
let's finish introductions. We're still trying.
I'm Burkhard Bohm, I'm a hydrogeologist, based in the Dresden area, Green area. And I came to this, taking an interest in these issues from the standpoint of global research. It has struck me already about 20 years ago that whenever the Chris Library group started talking about sitting in forests, so it would be an ideal giant experiment to see how this really works. Which has a boundary recharge, which is one of the more challenging issues in geology. And particularly bedrock areas. So I haven't had a chance to look at details on these maps yet, but what I can see right away is how we will eventually identify areas that are significant in terms of boundary recharge. Be it the geology that's suited for boundary recharge, or vegetation density and so on. So there's a lot to talk about. Don't get me going with this.
Okay, and next steps. Okay, so Burkhard at the next meeting is going to do his draft literature search for the water balance study, because Burkhard is, you saw it on the back of your Quincy Library Group initial hypotheses. We took those hypotheses and now we're taking it to the next step, which is to do this forest water study under this plan. So Burkhard is going to be bringing his literature search, which isn't anything on those documents. It's going through, pretty much all around the world. What is the state of knowledge on groundwater recharge from forest management? What do we know? So that, again, we can start from a science base, although Burkhard is telling us we don't know very much in the whole world about it, really. So we get to make this one up as we go. Okay, next, keep going.
Well, I've got something to ask Burkhard. So Burkhard, we have a system called CASGEM, and the state has identified several groundwater basins within the upper watershed. The biggest, of course, is the Sierra Valley. Are you aware of those basins that are caught up in GasGem? Because I'm kind of keying off of what he's saying is there's some storage basins out there. Humbug Valley, not the one that you're talking about. There's a number. American Valley is one of them. Indian Valley is one.
Bulletin 118, you're reviewing that,
Right.
Burkhard?
So, because another one's Meadow Valley. These are all what the state identifies as CASGEM water basins. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention that we do have already identified groundwater basins in the watershed. Kind of keying off, you were talking about the geology and everything.
They're Bulletin 118 basins, it's nothing new.
They're identified in the existing IRWN too.
That classifications probably came about based on upper storage capacity.
Mm-hmm.
They're probably the same basins, including Genesee, that the state studied to put dams in.
I wasn't going to wait until after introductions to talk about that, but that was actually one of my other concerns about potentially having mapped, is having those water basins identified according to priority with the new groundwater sustainability plan that's coming out as a new law, and they are using CASGEM as their basis, and part of what they base that on is alluvial water basins, because it said it's too difficult to give priority to fractured rock, and it's too hard to quantify and track water within those areas. And so at a meeting that I was at with the Department of Water Resources about 3 weeks ago, that was something that a number of us from the North State voiced, was that, we're in the upper watersheds, we know that our waters are our priority in the watershed, but we're at a low rating for, as far as the priority watershed. And they said it's based on alluvial basins, population size and water quantity used. And so to me, it felt kind of like the old CalFed process where water starts at the lake and goes down. And so we're working to try to get that language changed before it actually becomes law. But I would like to see, if possible, maybe those basins in the mapping as well.
The alluvial basins.
Yeah, the way that they have, that the Department of Water Resources has it, or in the CASGEM website.
They have it in Department of Water Resources.
Yeah.
They're reflective of what's in the existing IRWM on these basins.
Okay, I'm gonna push,
So sorry.
Terry, can we finish introductions? We got a half an hour to
Well,
do
let's
everything.
delay it a little longer. No, I'm Terry Rust. I'm the Workgroup coordinator for the Meadows, Floodplains, and Water Bodies Workgroup.
Okay, now you guys, we have one chore to do before we get to hear the presentation on the Marion Creek project, which is a conifer thinning project on Collins land. So I need to turn your attention to this table in your handout. Okay, and it's this table that has on the top resource management strategies and issues worksheet. Looks like this. Everybody there? It's about halfway through this packet. Yeah, you're getting there. You just gotta go the other way. Yeah, I'm sorry, we don't have pages on this. Okay, there's an intentionally blank thing. Look for that.
Right before the resource management strategy, right before the 9-page section.
Ryan, did you get one of those packets? Okay, good. Okay, so is everybody kind of on this page here?
That was in the packet?
Yeah. Yeah, it's about halfway through the packet.
Yeah, I mean,
It's this big wide thing.
Okay, I got it, so.
Okay, all right. So,
It's even smaller than that.
yeah, okay, so this is, because it's small, we can go fast, all right?
No, I'm not there yet.
So what we did last time is we brainstormed issues, okay? And that's this column across the top, these two columns across the top. One says Uplands and Forest Workgroup issues, it has those 5, you know, catastrophic wildfire, climate change, forest species, pace and scale, forest management infrastructure, adaptive management modeling, that sort of thing. Then underneath were all these sub-issues that the chairs said, you know, they're really under these. If you're dealing with these big 5, you're gonna deal with 1 or more of those. And then we went through this exercise of going down these resource management strategies that are in the California Water Plan, and which one of those, and they're all on the left, and as you can see, the ones that are the dark print are the ones we picked with the big X's. So those are the ones we're really, really responsible for. And then the ones that have those that little triangle thing at the top, those are the ones we said, well, we're not in charge of those, but we're kind of interested in those. So those are on the left side. Then there's a bunch of ones that we don't think apply to us at all, okay? And then what we're doing is trying to link our issues to these categories on the left side of the page. And since we all know that everybody loves to sit around here and fill out boxes, we thought the easiest way to do this is to get the chairs to take a first stab at this. All right, so what you see filled in is what John and Mike came up with, is that they were just filling out these boxes. This is how it looked to them. So you guys don't have to start all brand new down here. You can look at what the chairs did. You can say, yeah, I kind of agree with this, or I'm not sure, or maybe I think we ought to have another X over here, or that sort of thing. But what we have to do is we have to walk through this, because when we start looking at projects, okay, if you come in with a project that's on infiltration and inflow, we're saying, yeah, it's got multiple benefits. Everything that's got marked down here is things that we think are connected to that project. So that's how we go from what the California Water Plan thinks is important to what we're doing on the ground. And even though this is a tedious, horrible exercise, you don't have to do it for very much longer, and then we're done with it. That's the good news. So what I would like is, Mike, if you wouldn't mind helping us walk through this, what the Forest and the Meadows group did is the chair would talk about, okay, under agricultural water use efficiency, these are the 3 boxes we thought fit. Okay, and this is why. And then people can talk about whether that's kind of okay or not, or what they think about this, and we'll just walk through this table, and then we have accomplished what we were supposed to do, and we're done with it. Unless you want to open it up at a later date, but otherwise we are done filling out boxes and checking boxes and all that sort of thing. So, in my job in this whole category is when we're trying to figure out.
Could I do a sentence when you're done?
Sure. And then what my job is if we can't remember what the California Water Plan means by flood management, then I'll go back into these resource management strategies and I'll read it. If there's questions, okay? So that's how we hope we can blast through this and be done with this in short order. And John?
This is a method to make sure that whatever project we're working on fits within both the local and the state criteria.
Right.
And so we get bonus points immediately to some degree when we pick a project if we follow the project through this multi-level chess game.
Well, and the reason we did this is because then a project applicant doesn't have to go through all this. What does this hook do, and how does my project hook to this and that? They can kind of go, okay, if I'm going to do a project on loss of critical habitats, I think I'm doing forest management, ecosystem management, I'm doing watershed management, I'm hooked to these things. And so this box will help applicants not have to go through this. They can check with this and go, nah, my project doesn't fit all these, but it fits 3 of them. So that's really the purpose of doing this for a project proponent, so they don't have to go through this horrible exercise just to get a project in the queue. So you're helping other folks out. So Mike, you want to take it away?
Okay, thank you. Yeah. So I'll just review it really quickly and tell you what I did. So initially we identified these resource management strategies that were applicable to us. But they were already identified. We simply checked the ones that were applicable to our needs. Then we went through a process of identifying the issues at the 1 through 5. And then what was presented to us, pardon me?
Up top.
Yeah, up top. And then with this matrix, we had these sub-issues. At the time they were given to me, they were not called anything. I thought, well, those are maybe sub-issues underneath those 1 through 5. And so I just went through each one of the forest management and soil impacts sub-issue. I said, okay, which of the issues are related to that particular? So that's what the numbers are in each of those cells. And certainly we could go through, and I would appreciate anybody going through and say, well, why not this, or why not, or why not? But for me, to really do it thoroughly, I saw myself on one hand wanting to create a little narrative for each one of those. On the other hand, I thought that's crazy, and I don't have that kind of time. So what you have there is my quick run through on what I saw as linkages between resource management strategy and the issue and how they relate to those sub-issues. But as I look at it right now, I'm saying, well, looking at sub-issue fire liability on the right-hand side, I see I only
3/4 of the way across. Okay.
Yeah, 3/4 of the way across. I see I only linked it to pace and scale and to adaptive management. But why did I not include number 1? It's the obvious oversight. So it's not perfect. I see that.
But that's what we're doing today.
It is extremely useful for what you did because the other groups have had to work from scratch.
Yes. I didn't want us to sit here and deliberate about it.
So thank you to the chairs for calling into this, Mike.
Well, I'm here representing people who are interested in loss of critical habitats. I would add 3 to forest management and ecosystem restoration. Because I think we're losing critical habitat unless we do the appropriate pace and scale for us.
Okay.
Why did I not think of that?
What are we thinking?
Probably because
Because
you
everybody's
don't,
done
you
it.
think everybody's David Evans.
Well, remember, I did a similar thing with the goals and objectives, and I took a shot at it too, so you have to recognize that, don't shoot the message.
No, I just,
So we want to
now I'm
add,
done.
subtract.
I could go home now.
No, wait a minute, don't go home yet. Okay, so how do you wanna do this?
Postpone for 2 hours.
So I would invite others to have a look through, and
Do you wanna go down the side, or how do you wanna do this?
we've got effectively 15 minutes.
That's right.
And that's not near enough time to get through the one row or one column, so. I think it would be better to get everybody to 100% on that next time. But next time we ought to form.
But, well, if we can get through some of this, do you see any glaring?
One idea is just to email changes.
Yeah, that's what I was.
That's what we went through, as you know, and did ours, and then put it out to all the group members, asked for comments back on.
Well, from my point of view, it was quick because I could defer to Mike and John with confidence, except in the area in which I'm supposed to meet.
Jay, I see you marking something over there.
It was the suggestion that Mike had on fire liability of number 1 and number 3 that Michael suggested.
Any other things popping out for people at this point?
Yeah, this is really helpful because it makes whoever's writing a conceptual thing in the next 2 weeks to have something in their hand to say, that have the narrative written before they get done with the page.
Well, and that's why I'd like to push everybody a little harder today, because the more information that we can give to people, the easier it gets.
Well, given all that, I think people have had this now for a week or so, without explanation, of course, but still. I think we ought to use it just like these maps as something in progress that we're going to amend as we go along, but to use it as a working framework right now.
And did you like what the chairs came up with? Is you've got these big issues and then you've got these other issues that are below them? Did that work for you guys? To have these overarching issues that everything we're doing is kind of focused on one of these 5, but a project might only be looking at one piece of this. So does that work for everybody as a way to start looking at this? The other thing we did is we added a category, water for wildfire, because when you look through they have all these things like surface storage, and they have all this municipal recycled water, they had all these kind of conveyance system reoperation stuff that was like, what does this have to do with us? But when you think about fire, I know in the Yuba watershed, they don't have enough water for fire and drinking water and those kinds of things. So that's
Most watersheds right now, they don't.
right. So this is why we added this column. So I hope everybody's okay with that. That was kind of a change that we came up with after the last meeting.
Yeah, the one thing I've noticed on this is that number 13, surface storage, nobody picked it up as a priority.
Right. I mean, Ag does. Ag's interested.
Interested, but not a priority.
We did too.
I'm just surprised by that, I guess.
Yeah.
Bug banks, metal.
Yes, some of the other groups are picking it up, but for our purposes,
Yeah.
well, I wasn't aware on forest lands that people were actually creating, surface storage for their management. But they might be doing it for water for wildfire.
I'm thinking about it more and more.
Yeah.
Another piece that things you don't think about are the NPDES. I mean, if we start getting behind with state board and they start giving us the stuff that the coast has got, then that whole world changes drastically. So far, Bahama's been the only insane group that we've been dealing with, but they all could get insane pretty quick. And
Everything the state board's doing is less than 10,000, less than 3,000 hookups. They're not paying any attention to anybody who has less than 3,000 hookups. And we don't have one big enough to have 3,000.
And so
Can
you
I ask a question?
Ryan, you would add water, you would add surface storage to this last column, right?
I guess what I was saying is you adding water for wildfires is a good thing.
And we should put surface, just have it in there.
Sub-issue, yeah.
Okay.
I would call it water for fire management, because you need water for prescribed fire too.
Right.
Water for wildfire and fire management?
Just call it water for fire management.
Water for firemen, okay.
If you don't call it surface storage, you're gonna be in a lot better shape.
Okay, so don't put it in there.
Just call it storage?
Yeah.
Is that what you mean?
You might even
Water
say,
for wildfire.
you might even say resource management, because I know in a lot of our timber cells, we're limited by
Yes.
water holes and
Water
water
for resource management.
So
Fire
water
and-
for resource management.
Fire and resource management.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks,
Good
that's
system.
good.
So can I ask a clarifying question? The X's mean what?
They mean that they're of interest to this group, but they're not the priority, the 1 through 5.
Okay.
You know, it's more of a project level, and they're dealing with these categories where we haven't said we're gonna take a priority interest on. They're just things that we're interested in, we think these book. If a project comes forward that deals with this, yeah, we can put it in our bucket.
I've got a question, Mike and John, on, for both forest management and ecosystem restoration. Under one in the middle there, the conifer encroachment in the meadows, aspens, and black oaks. Shouldn't, forest species impacts and climate change, number 2, be included on that? Because, I mean, those, they're definitely changing the forest species
Sure.
in there. And with climate change, it's probably even more important that those meadow species get addressed.
I would add 1 on that too, on the conifer encroachment, because, you know, you're creating a crown fire hazard in black oaks by having all the fur come in.
This is so ripe for amendments and additions once you get into it, because in each one, you can think of 3 different things you want to do, and each one has a different set of issues and sub-issues.
So I would submit to you then just how quickly Jay and Zeke and Ryan all found deficiencies with my list, that allows everybody else to go through it in more detail. I was going through it quickly because I just thought, man, this is a horrendous task, and now I'm not too excited about doing it.
That would be the understatement.
Right.
But I
It's like, okay, you guys.
That's why I'm
Well,
curious if there were reasons why you took it.
Nope, I was just going through it quickly, because I only had a limited amount of time,
Yep.
and so I'm gonna go through
Okay,
this.
thanks for doing it.
And we're thinking less is more. You know, the more it's
Right.
hooked to other things, the better it looks to people from the water side looking in, going, so what does this forest management do anyway?
Yeah, you get bonus points for including a mere quotation at the beginning of that application.
Reading it from a water perspective, the weakness, the strength is in these numbers down here and the identification of the 5 issues. Not a damn one of them says anything about water.
Well, how about infiltration and inflow changes?
You're talking
Is
about,
our
you're talking about
sub-issue?
the 5,
It's a sub.
5 at the top.
I'm talking about the 5 at the top.
Well, you're right. Okay, so what do we do about that?
Got
Well-
water.
No, but
I don't think it causes a revolution. Do we need to add some? Unless Michael has a thought on how to word that.
yeah, that's what we're talking about. What is your suggestion?
I kind of felt the same thing, but I didn't know what the.
Well, the fixes, I mean, it sounds like, I mean, what you get downstream of the dams is, don't talk to us about fires, that's the Forest Service's problem. So, if you want anybody to listen to the project, it would be catastrophic wildfire and its effects on
Water quality.
water. They don't care about
And
quality.
that's where, yeah,
Hydrology.
Further on in this process, you start linking into the IRWM objectives, and that's where you start making those connections.
Right.
That's how we did it in there.
Because there's a water.
The water industry believes that water quality is solved by their sinking ponds called Lake Oroville. I mean, the sediment falls out, so they don't care below about sediment.
still there.
What if we
Yeah, but-
named, what if we named
They
the
got
whole
100
title?
years before.
What if we put uplands and forests, work group issues, uplands and forests, work group issues, for water, we could put it way up at the top.
Oh, water related uplands and forest work group issues.
How's that for a
That's
title?
There we go.
Okay,
Nice shot.
Water-related uplands and forest work group.
okay, then we've, if they read the title, then they know what they're doing.
Just slate disease.
What?
Ryan?
How about like fire, instead of number one being catastrophic wildfire, what if it was hydrologic effects of catastrophic wildfire?
Yeah, I mean,
Well, we could say, this is another thought, catastrophic wildfire and hydrology.
Doesn't it fall
Climate
under
change
number
and
two?
hydrology.
I mean, these are the issues that we're dealing with as forest managers, right? And so we don't really have the capacity to squeeze more water out of the clouds per se, other than maybe cloud seeding or whatnot. But water for us is the water yield output. That's all a benefit from forest management. But I sort of see number two is where some of those water issues fall under is climate change, drought, and forest health and forest species impacts.
if you want to bring it to Orange County Water District's attention, it would say something like catastrophic wildfire and ET effects, evapotranspiration. Because evapotranspiration is the new water source, is to cut down climate change and evapotranspiration, then forest species. Forest health treatment and evapotranspiration reduction. Because they're used to dealing with that. And it's the only truly new water anywhere in the state. Everything else depends, you can recycle, but you can only recycle the existing water. So the coming thing is reduction of evapotranspiration. And every farmer can tell you, within a gnat's.
So I would submit, so maybe that's the way to do it is the ET and building upon what Ryan said also.
Which is way over on the right.
What we've missed here, I think this is a great observation, we really have missed water.
Right.
But what I'm thinking is, so I'm thinking water. Right now, the manifestation of lack of water is a competition in moisture stress and insect activity is picking up in particularly the southern Sierra. And we're starting to see more and more signs here.
And
that's not here as an issue.
It's not.
So insects.
But it needs to go into these five.
Sub-issue.
I know.
It's not a sub-issue.
It's like major.
It is
That's
the
what we're
issue.
doing, increasing availability.
Right. So and comparing it to a storage dam, I'm walking into a room and they're talking about a storage dam, and my first question is, what's your water source? Because everything proposed is just taking more water out of the same rivers. We want to be in a situation to answer reduced ET.
And increased infiltration, or
Right.
does that even?
Sure, I
Okay,
mean,
so water
but you gotta get it from somewhere.
well, what I think people are saying is we need to kick it up to the main purpose of what we're doing here, right? And so what's not quite right here is our big title at the top and, how we tie it to the big five. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, so we got 5 more minutes to brainstorm ways to do that.
Well, what about favorable flows and then use the definitions afterwards?
Well, yeah, I mean, just
Well,
brainstorm things that
They
we
don't
can
know
play
anything
around.
about favorable flows.
That's
so
a Forest Service stuff.
But at the state level, it's the water source that allows you to recycle, that allows you to store water in the ground. You can't take any more out of the rivers, so you've gotta get it from less evapotranspiration. And it deals with climate change.
So what if we say,
Why don't you just call it 6 and go on, because you're gonna waste out all your time trying to find some title.
well, but what I'm hearing is water availability and catastrophic fire and water availability? Is it, could you go down those 5 and add that word, and are we done? You know what I mean? Or do you want more detail? I mean, you really need to give me some
Well,
direction there,
I
guys.
think Michael's point needs to be listened to. This is state, the state doesn't care about anything except ET as far as we're concerned.
And infiltration, they got a new groundwater law.
Well, the groundwater, the California Water Commissioner at a meeting a couple weeks ago talked a little more in depth, and I'm still trying to wrap my mind around it, but that storage doesn't mean building sites or reservoirs. It means ecological, 50% of it has to go to ecological benefit, and so we're looking at uplands forests and trying to increase water storage in the ground, in the soils, and so, it's also groundwater storage and ET. And so
Yeah,
climate,
so
climate change.
So water,
The open reservoirs add to ET development.
yeah, it does. I mean, so I
open
think
reservoirs
Workgroup
too, but groundwater-
did a very useful thing in adding to, reduced ET and increased infiltration.
Okay,
So that's number 6.
Well, sort of like what Carl said, could you just give it a number 6 and then have it a broad umbrella, like
The-
altered hydrological cycles?
I
Something
really
like that.
think that's a step backward in the sense that reduced ET is what the rest of this is. I mean, pace and scale, why do you care about pace and scale if it's only for fire or wood?
So evapotranspiration is the sum of evaporation and plant transpiration from the ocean surface to the atmosphere.
so reduced ET, and what's the other piece of that?
Increased infiltration.
Okay, all right, and that will either go as a separate, it's either a number 6, or it goes up here as part of all the 5, or it goes in the title. Just what we got a few more minutes. What's your thinking on this? How much do we elevate it? Michael, you want it way up there in the title, right?
Yeah, I think it's the purpose
What
of the
this whole
project.
thing is about.
Okay. Is that,
So you've already got water-related uplands and forest workgroup issues. It's refinement with some water language into the 5.
no, what I'm hearing is that water-related uplands, forest issues, reduced ET and infiltration has to be in that title. Is that right?
Yes.
Isn't that the whole goal?
That's what I think, yeah.
The uplands and forest workgroup issues are reduced ET and increased infiltration. And these 5
You ready?
are ways of dealing with that.
So you just have a colon after issue, just for those,
Yeah.
Reduced ET and increased.
Infiltration, and then everything below it makes sense from there, is that right?
Right.
at least for the next 10 minutes,
Yeah.
it makes sense. So
No, I mean, it's,
No, but I mean,
How would
we're,
he know to go?
okay,
to
great,
Google
we
Hangouts?
did it,
We
thank
told
you
him.
guys.
But what Google Hangouts? You give
All
him
right,
like-
now, if you wanna fiddle with these
We didn't
X's
like-
and you wanna
We
do more
tested
with this,
on
let
us,
me
not
know.
yours. Oh, it's the same link.
Because the next project is about, the next, work group meeting's about projects and how we make sure we've got.
well, let's find out who's doing projects, how's it
Do
gonna
you wanna,
transpire? We got
do you wanna
2
call
weeks
him?
to get project concepts in, what happens.
What will he look for? Are you set up on Google
Leah's
Hangouts
on
right
the
now?
phone with everybody going,
Yeah, so you
haven't
could
seen
go
any
to
projects.
theriver.org.
Can I help you fill out the form?
Do you think you're far enough along to do that? Or people are far enough along to respond to you?
I think people have projects in their mind, it's just like, why bother putting it in here? You know, and everybody makes a living thinking about projects.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So the short form is helpful, because as long as it doesn't have to have a whole lot of detail.
absolutely not.
I even think you could just give, like I said before, let's brainstorm, guys, let's get something down on that paper. Doesn't have to be perfect, the short form does.
Hey, what about issues with the greenway stuff? Is that?
Now, how does Greenways hook into water?
Well, I mean, it's people cleaning up around their yards and fire safe and getting rid of vegetation.
It's number 4, forest management infrastructure and implementation capacity.
Should we
You get a
put,
lot of support from the community.
That's for sure, or non-support, as is the case with the current boiler.
Hey,
Mike,
he's there.
What's that?
okay,
Yep,
so
there he is, okay.
is that another category, or just, we just put a parentheses including green waste under number 4? Or does that just make it confusing? Is that just in the weeds for us?
It's forest.
But it's a particular specific issue.
Yes.
Yeah, I could see it's fitting under number 4
Chris, are you
as
there?
your larger issues, and then under the sub issue after biomass infrastructure is inadequate.
Yeah, hi, I'm here.
Okay. I just wanted to check the connection.
Okay.
So would it be under pollution prevention or just under forest management? We got it. We're gonna ask him for project 1.
Are we ready?
Yeah. We did it. Thanks, you guys.
Okay, so want me to introduce, or Jay, do you want to introduce Chris, or we can do it as a team? Okay, so at this point, I'd like to introduce Chris Sertley. Chris is a hydrology professor, watershed management professor at Cal Poly in San Luis Obispo. And Chris has been working on a project with Collins Pine, studying meadow encroachment, if I'm not mistaken. And he's going to share that work with us. So it's called the Marion Creek Project. Anything more? So we can see you, Chris. So I guess what you'll want to do is toggle to, or maybe supplement the introduction that I just gave for you, and then go ahead and toggle to your PowerPoint.
Yeah, so good morning, everybody. I have the PowerPoint up on my screen. Do you see that now where you are?
Not at the moment, we're seeing you.
No, you can click, if you scroll on the screen, you can click off on the left-hand side to share your screen.
Yeah, I thought I did that. There we go.
There we
Great,
go.
we can see it.
Good job.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, good morning. Yeah, so Jay Francis with Colin Pine suggested that you might be interested in hearing a little bit about the research we've been doing on their forest associated with looking at the hydrologic response of meadow restoration, specifically by conifer removal. So removing trees off historic meadows. And so the problem, and first off, is not a problem. I mean, encroachment of conifers onto meadows is a natural process. It's just part of plant succession. But the issue is with sort of a change in the ecology in the Sierras with fire suppression and changes in local hydrology, this process can be accelerated. So you add to that over the last century, meadow habitat has decreased in the Sierra Nevada. And so lodgepole pine is typically the first that will colonize. It's a species that can handle a lot of stress. It doesn't mind wet conditions, and once the lodgepole gets established, then it kind of dries things out, and then what follows is mixed conifer species. So Jay can probably explain this better, but Collins Pines Almanor Forest has been doing some restoration on what they think are historic meadows, areas that conifers have encroached upon. And the idea is that they remove the lodgepole pine and try to promote wetland species, aspen, regeneration, these types of amenities. And following the removal, then they also continue on with brush and tree control post-restoration with the hope of keeping the meadow in a meadow system. And what they found was that there really is not a lot of scientific literature quantifying whether or not what they're doing is really creating the appropriate hydrologic response to promote a wetland over the long term. And so that's where I got involved. came up and visited with Jay and found out about the problem, and it sounded like an interesting problem. So we thought we would test this and see if we could come up with some data about, you know, what is the hydrology doing when they do this conifer removal. So we set up a study. We call it the Marion Meadow Study. It's located up on the Collins Pines Almanor Forest, close to Lake Chester, right off of Highway 36. And can you see my pointer here?
Not at the moment. Chris, you might want to activate show slide so that your slide itself looks larger. Right now we're seeing the slide as well as the whole slide set.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay, well, I appreciate that.
There you go.
All right, I apologize. I didn't know that.
That's all right.
So the Marion Meadow is something.
It still didn't do it. Still didn't toggle.
You might have to share a different screen that's showing the full screen.
Maybe we stick with this then. Okay. Yeah. Go ahead. We can see it, so it's okay.
It's good enough.
Just not optimal.
Keep going. Yeah.
Okay. So I'm getting a really bad here. I don't know if like a speaker's been moved or something.
What are you getting? Feedback?
Yeah, it's like I get an echo of my voice. It seems to be better now. All right, I apologize for the interruption. So the goal of the study was to compare the hydrologic response in a meadow before and after conifer removal. And so we set it up where we have a meadow, Marion Meadow as we call it, because Marion Creek flows through the area. It's an area we think it's a historic meadow, and it has lodgepole pine all over the top of it. And then a little bit further down the road is an area that Collins had already restored. And we're using that as a control, where we have a way to compare before and after so that we can control for climate. And so we've instrumented both the meadows with shallow groundwater wells and soil moisture probes. And so those little icons that you see in the colored areas of the meadow areas show you where we have our instruments. And then if you look down below, you can kind of see a picture of what it looks like in the wintertime. The control meadow has had the lodgepole removed. You can see it has active standing water there when things are wet. And Marion Meadow, you know, it kind of looks like a meadow, but there's still a lot of trees there. So in addition to our soil moisture and groundwater wells, we've also been using some periodic measurements. There's a geophysical technique called electrical resistivity tomography. Dr. John Jakusek is a geophysicist who's working with us on this. And so we're able to define the groundwater level with this. And in the case of Marion Meadow, we actually could determine the confining layer. So typically in meadow systems, there's an impervious surface a certain depth down that allows water to perch on top of it that creates the wetland. And so the top image that you see there, the color blue is where water is, and it's currently at a depth of about 2 to 3 meters. And then if you go down to about 12 to 13 meters, you'll see it turning back to the brown and yellow. That means higher resistivity values.
Hey, Chris, we're not seeing your slides. I think if you go back up to the option to share screens. There we go.
Oh, dear.
If you go over there on the left-hand side, you might be able to share. There might be more than one screen open for PowerPoint. One that has your full slideshow and one that shows just the PowerPoint program.
Okay, do you see it full screen now or just partial?
Just partial.
Partial, but we're seeing the slide you're talking about, which is great.
Okay.
It's not updating, Chris. Every time you go to a new slide, it doesn't update it on our end.
It doesn't.
Well, there's a lag.
Let me just see something really quick.
So Chris hadn't done this before, particularly with Google Hangout, so we're all learning here.
Yeah, well, you can see at least my slide now.
Yeah.
Yes, excellent.
Okay, so the top image is showing resistivity measurement. Water has very low resistivity, and so the blue colors show you where the water is. The hotter colors show you where there's higher resistivity than lack water. And so besides defining where the groundwater is spatially for us, so that we don't have to drill deep wells, we also get some information about soil moisture spatially. And so if you look at the bottom image, we actually ran a transect through into the forest. And there's an arrow there showing where that boundary is. And you can see the hot colors on the surface of the ground, and then the more greenish colors when you get in the meadows. So we're hoping that that's also going to help us a little bit with contrasting soil moisture. The point behind this is that, you know, you have an instrument in the ground like a well or a soil moisture probe. That's just one little point. And with the ERT, we can actually do long spatial stretches and actually look at variation across space. So it gives us a deeper look plus a more broad spatial. Okay, did the slide update for you?
No.
There you go.
There we go.
Okay. That's disappointing. Okay, so what our study design is we're taking what we call a water balance approach, where we're looking at the soil moisture, groundwater, precipitation inputs, and then we're estimating evapotranspiration. And we put the instruments in 2013. And we've had 2 winters of pre-restoration calibration. And so possibly this month, maybe next month, the Marion Meadow will be harvested. And so Collins was really good, really helpful in the fact that what we thought would be a really interesting experiment would be to just do the meadow restoration. And let's see what kind of response we get. And then the second year, go ahead and harvest the upslope area surrounding the meadow. So we're going to get a contrast of not only just removing the trees from the meadow, but also then what happens hydrologically when you provide a harvest around the surrounding area. And I believe they're going to be harvesting around 30% of the basal area. Jay could be thinking about that. Okay, so here's just a little bit of preliminary data. When we talk about storage in the meadow, about 90% of our water balance is groundwater. And so what you're seeing is water content through time. The blue line is the control meadow, the red being Marion. And a couple things are visible here. First off, in the spring, wetter season, when you have snow melt and rains, the control meadow has a much higher water table. In fact, almost about 2 feet higher. But the soils on the control meadow are actually a lot more porous, and they drain a lot quicker. They don't hold the water quite as well as Marion Meadow does. So what you see is a pretty rapid drawdown into the summertime period when there is no precipitation. Yet Marion seems to hold water a lot better the dry season. So what that's indicating to us is that we think that this is going to be a really good system to restore, because it looks to me like it holds water fairly well. We're just getting the trees off and getting less evapotranspiration and more infiltration. Hopefully we'll see the water levels up to the similar to what the control meadow is showing. The other thing that's interesting is the change in soil moisture. So what this graph is showing is the control versus Marion, just the soil moisture percentage. And because the soils are different, they have slightly different field capacity. Field capacity is kind of the point where when you get water beyond that, we consider that saturated or near saturated. And so the blue, light blue line is the percentage where Marion Meadow hits field capacity, and the red line is where the control meadow hit field capacity. And yet the red line, we don't have our colors very well here, sorry. The red line is the control and the blue line is Marion. But what I want to point out is that it goes into the saturated and near saturated at the same time with both of them. So it's interesting in the context that what the telling us is that these do appear to be very similar hydrologically, and they probably are reacting the same. So we have a reasonable pair to do comparisons on. And it looks like Marion doesn't have as high a soil moisture as the already restored area, but we now have something to compare to after we get the harvest to see if that comes up to the levels the control is at. So we've established the methods for how we're going to compare meadows. Following this coming winter, we'll have our first year of post-restoration data with the removal of trees only on Marion. And then following the winter after this one, we'll have a second year of post-restoration data with upslope harvest included. So we'll be able to contrast the difference between the two. And that's essentially all we're funded for at this point. And I have a slide about some of my future ideas, but maybe this might be a time to stop to see if you have a question.
Any questions, anybody?
Yeah, do you envisage that you'll be an applicant for local funds that are going to be available starting June 1st to continue this work?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the start of your question.
Do you anticipate that you'll apply for funding under this Irwin project proposal to continue your work?
So I'm actually not familiar with it. I am hoping to put in a proposal next year. Maybe I should just quickly do that slide since you asked that question about funding.
Who's funding this now?
Can you see my PowerPoint?
So, Chris, the question was, how is it being funded at this point?
He's going to show that.
Okay.
We can't see the slide yet.
Okay, you just see me?
Yep.
All right. Currently, I have some state agricultural funds, and our department at Cal Poly gets an allocation of McIntyre-Stennis funds. Those are federal forest research funds that are funded by timber taxes for forest research. And so that's funded 2 graduate students on this project and the instrumentation. And so what I would like to do going forward, potentially prolong this so we can get more data collected, is, and also potentially look at some other sites, is going after a larger state agricultural grant that we're able to get, and probably also more McIntyre-Stennis funds. The catch to it, though, is that we have to be able to match that money. And we also have to have a cooperator. And so right now I've been in conversations with the University of California, Merced, and their Southern Sierra Critical Zone, as they talk about, would they be willing to cooperate with their research down in the Southern Sierras to try to do, a broader spatial distribution of this type of research. My hypothesis is that, with the stresses that the forests and the Sierras are going to see in the future with climate change, the fact that forest densities are not, they're denser, they're not at their historic density. I hypothesize that forest management that potentially brings us back to historic density could actually provide some resiliency to maintaining the hydrologic regime of these meadows. So it's not so much a water yield for economic purposes, more for ecological purposes is my interest.
And to answer the question, I would say that I think this project would qualify for these type of funds. And it's something that obviously it's already in place, so it's got a head start. So yeah, my intention is to apply for some of these funds because we don't know what these agricultural funds are going to be like in the future.
Right. So that's what I would suggest is Collins Pine work with you, Chris, to immediately on this opportunity, at least get it in as a concept. And then we'll let it go from there. And you can develop, or we can develop additional partners. One of the thoughts I had, so aside from the funding issue and the current grant opportunity, I have a question just on the methods and given the current drought, I'm wondering if we should not, if you want to go forward next year on the upland thinning, as opposed to trying to capture a different water year, a different input in terms of how water is going to react. Does your data show that the meadow was fully charged? Do we know about that? So you know, it doesn't work very well for your master's student because you're talking about extending the length of the project. But on the other hand, you've already invested so much in your preliminary work that you cut it off by cutting the trees off. So to the extent that you could extend and get better baseline, at least for a while, that might be something to think about.
Is it possible to get that presentation on the website?
Can we get a copy of your presentation to put on this project website?
Yeah, sure. Fine.
We can, yeah.
And Mike, to answer your question, I'm curious how Chris would respond, but because we did get a fair amount of moisture early this year, November, I mean, I think we're still at around 80% of normal or something for the water year. You know, there were some pretty good measurements taken back then. And we've had 2 years, granted they've been 2 relatively dry years for the baseline data. Quite honestly, the timing on this was geared towards the funding. If we could get some additional funding for this, we might be able to, you know, do the harvesting of the meadow area this summer, and then maybe get 2 years worth of data before we do the upslope. And it's under one of the new 7-year timber harvest plans, so we do have time to go out. But Chris and I haven't talked about that to see about the time.
Yeah. On the other hand, it's you could look at it as a pilot study, and we look at other meadow opportunities and maybe other landowners to come up with some replications of the approach.
Well, what's exciting about this, Chris, is you have the control area and then you have the project area, and hopefully we'll get a variety of precipitation types. And so I think extending it is a really good idea because you have a lot of control on what's going to occur and when, which you don't in other areas. And then hopefully with Burkhardt's work, when we do extrapolate to other meadows, we'll know what's different and what's the same. But I think a temporal study like this is invaluable. If we can continue it, it would be wonderful.
Yeah, I'm limited by the grant funds that I have.
Right.
And there's they only are allocated for a certain amount of time. And so that's what I told them about. And I think my opinion always has been in this is that I wanted to see what happened after the harvest. We hypothesized that change. I think we believe that. But what if we don't see anything? What if we can't measure it? Then I would start questioning whether or not really going long term is a good idea. So that was sort of one prerogative that I had. But I don't know, what I see in the preliminary data, I find it hard to believe that hypothesis won't come true, but I can't say that for certain. As far as elongating it, it would be much more interesting to have a year or two post restoration. You just don't have the variability in what's going to happen. And then finally, you know, as far as when you're thinking about the drought, you know, that's unfortunately that is what it is. From a research perspective, actually kind of nice. We like the endpoints. You know, we like to see the extremes because that's what we want to find. When everything's hunky-dory and perfect, that's not so interesting to us. We're doing research. We want to see the worst case scenario. And so the drought in some ways is kind of an interesting thing to be looking at. But we do have the control to compare to. So we kind of have climate control for in there. And so we can still get a meaningful comparison with the drought.
Any more questions of Chris? Well, thanks, Chris. Great job. Sorry for the technical difficulty, but it worked quite well. I mean, it worked well. It can be better, and we'll improve upon that. But for your first web experience, I think it went pretty well and saved you about 14 to 15 hours of driving. So that's a good deal. So thank you.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you for that.
All right.
Thank you
Take
so
it easy,
much.
Chris.
Thank
We'll be
you.
in touch.
Thanks.
Okay, sounds good. Bye.
Bye.
Just to clarify, we're not removing only lodgepole. I mean, there's other conifer species in there as well. The goal is to try to remove as many of the lodgepole as we possibly can and leave some of the larger conifers that we feel historically were out there. I mean, if there's 40-inch trees out there in the meadow, they've probably been there a long time.
So as long as it's the usual columns, usually that you keep track of it, see if it's still growing.
Yeah, it's gonna get a pretty good little haircut, and the interesting thing is, it's right on Highway 36 as you're heading west out of town. And it's gonna gain the attention of the general public. So I'm actually, I'm actually meeting with Kate West, our local reporter, tomorrow, picking her out, and hopefully gonna have an article in the paper in the next week or two. And maybe even offer up a public meeting if folks want to go out and take a look at the project out on the ground. If anyone's really interested. And we're also developing some signs to put up along the highway to let folks know. What's that?
How far out of town is it?
It's about 3 miles.
Near the
Okay, well,
Park 40 or?
you've got some signs out there, okay.
Yeah, it's just past where trucks are entering the highway right now. You kind of dip down in a little low there, where Marion Creek runs across the road. It's interesting. It's called Marion Creek. It's actually a Class 3. I've never heard of a named intermittent stream before, but I don't know who Marion was. But she,
Got a creek named after her.
yeah, got a creek named after her, but it's an intermittent Class 3 stream. It'll be interesting to see if that upgrades from a 3 to a 2 over time.
Yeah. I guess you could always give people firewood if they complain.
My next question, where can I find the lodge?
Yeah, where do we get all that lodgepole?
We're probably going to get the biggest complaints from the firewood cutters, because that's kind of a little honey hole.
How close is it to the PCT trail? Or Park 40?
About a mile and a half from the PCT Park 40. So.
That's good.
Great project. Yeah.
So Burkhard, what did you take away from this presentation?
Well, I was just thinking, this data may generate some interesting data to estimate the water consumption of hydrogens.
And how would you do that?
By looking at the line of groundwater table through the seasons and understanding the porosity of the output. That's basically that would be the way to do it. Then you just got to count how many trees you had in that spot, what the age distribution was, the size distribution was, and it's kind of extrapolate back to how much water. So density of forest.
I've got a, sorry, are you done?
Yeah.
I've got a
Can I
question.
address that real quick? Is it, I just wanted to address
Go
what
ahead,
we're talking about. We've actually done a fairly intensive survey, sampling of the area pre-harvest.
Yeah.
So we know what species, size, density is out there before the harvest. So then we'll be able to compare that post-harvest, see exactly how much we've taken off there as well.
So you'll recruit it after you harvest.
Exactly. Plus, we'll scale all the wood that comes in and measure what comes in as far as chips, everything, yeah.
My question's for Ryan Helburn.
Yeah.
Is you guys have those meadows north of Westwood? You got similar lodgepole meadows. Would you guys be interested in, if there was a project, if Jay put in for a project to expand this study, would you guys be interested in doing something similar north of town there in that string of meadows that go up by the railroad tracks, north of Westwood?
Yeah, it's definitely possible. I could think of better places to do it than that string.
Sure, but
Maybe
are there
more effective.
places
There's
you got?
that I've looked at before. But yeah, it's gotta make sense to get out. Narrow spot.
Is there any history on when the encroachment started happening in the meadow?
We have some aerial photos from the 40s where you can see the meadow pretty well defined in there. I mean, you can see little trees starting to come up in there at that point in time. But it was mostly open back in the 40s. So it's probably been in the last 70, 80 years, probably with fire exclusion.
Yeah, I was just about to ask, how come the meadows have remained? It's probably because of lack of fire.
Lack of fire and
then
management.
Trina?
For however many years, we haven't been allowed to really manage that. That's right. A new thing in like the last 5 years.
Yeah, that's one of the tribal objectives, is to restore fire to the ecosystem, and so we're just starting it in smaller places. And one of my thoughts during this process is if you cut a tree down, do lodgepoles or other conifers continue to try to uptake water for the first year or two after they're cut before their root systems completely die, or do they just immediately?
The conifers, once you cut below the last green stem, it's dead. And it doesn't have the capacity to do.
And then the other, this probably doesn't affect water supply very much, but then you think about the mycorrhizal fungi and the other symbiotic organisms that live in soils to maintain tree species. And so it would be really interesting for me to actually go into a further in-depth study that would cost more money and require more money, but very, very interesting. And then to reintroduce fire so that you don't have those kind of big conifers encroaching to begin with, but that's another step.
Our hope is that once we reduce most of the conifers out of there, that the water table is going to come up, and that will help to inhibit conifer infiltrate or invasion in the area as well. I mean, he was right when he talked about the lodgepole coming in and them being able to suck up. I mean, those, it's amazing how much water the lodgepole will transpire.
Very exciting.
But that is interesting because on the line that the lodgepole doesn't like a high water table. But how does the lodgepole come into being?
Well, they'll start on the edges where the water table is not.
Reduce the water table.
Yeah. They're kind of the leading
Pioneers.
The pioneer, the leading troops going into the invasion.
That's what I talked about drying out the site.
Exactly.
But they they do grow in really wet sites though, lodgepole.
Yeah,
To
they
the
will.
lake.
But if it's completely saturated, they can't survive.
It does bring up that point though, that wide swath of land that's still in the Feather River watershed, but is north of Highway 36.
Like Drake's Bad.
The Forest Service, for example, did numerous projects that were meadow encroachment kind of projects.
The last one, was this
The last of it, yeah. And around 44, and like that.
Yeah, Bobette's done a lot of work in that
Oh,
portion of the watershed,
yeah.
through Aspen enhancement, Bobette Jones, and yeah, that's one.
Yeah,
They've been really active on the last, and especially the Eagle Lake District, working on. And they've done some really good work.
Oh, they have. And Almanar too. I mean, the Highway 44, does it kind of break up the two ranger districts?
A21.
is the
Oh,
right
A21.
one.
Yeah, so just, that's like this chunk here. But there's hardly any national forest in this chunk here, really. I mean, you've got
There's a fair
SPI
amount.
and Beatty, but there's not a ton of it in the flats there around Westwood.
How big is this number? How many acres are we talking about?
You know, I think it's around 150 total, something like that, hundreds of 150.
But they range drastically throughout the watershed.
Yeah.
So it's interesting
taking
that,
things.
you know, everybody's talked about conifer encroachment. I know down in the Central Sierra, they're saying they've lost all their meadows because they can't even see them anymore. You know, they're smaller, so they've completely lost them. And one of the things we were talking to the mappers about was, how do you show the potential of doing this? So when you were looking at what elevation and then the tree species mix that was in there. That's what triggered your thinking of that it used to be a meadow, or how did you approach it?
Well, I mean, we know this is where the water runs. We could look at the species mix in there. Now, also, that area is what's considered a little frost pocket, where lodgepole does better than other species as well. But we went back to the historical air photos.
Okay.
And that was a very helpful definition of where that was. And I guarantee that if once you get out on the ground and you start looking around, you might find some old aspen skeletons or something there. That's a pretty good indicator that you had open areas in there. And if once you do the conifer removal, it is amazing how quickly it responds.
Like what
With
response?
With aspen or
With
any
aspen?
other hardwood
Wow.
species, riparian vegetation, they will come right back.
With the water temps.
Exactly.
No, it would be interesting to see what uses more water, gas or the pine trees.
It depends on what time of year, because they're leafless in the winter. The infiltration is really high. They use a lot of ET in the summer, but in the winter, there's no conifer crown to radiate that.
Transpiration.
You have a lot of summer, but in the winter, they're infiltrating. My guess is they're infiltrating way more than a conifer stump.
So I'm wondering if there'd be interest in this room in doing a LiDAR type study to map and help plan meadow, like forest management around meadows. We've looked at using the 10-meter elevation models, and you really can't see that variation in slope, but with the LiDAR and being able to get that highly accurate surface model, I think it'd be a quick way to map areas that had that potential, you know, as far as designing kind of landscape scale treatments around meadows. So I'm wondering if that'd be a project we'd be interested in doing analysis on if there was interest in the group.
It's a lot of money.
So
Would that just give you the geographic, I mean, or are you talking about using the vegetative information?
Well, you could use both. You get a bare earth model that's a really accurate DEM, but then you can also look at you can do really pretty good canopy metrics as far as getting your total basal area on a real detailed area, detailed. It takes quite a bit of groundwork, but you can get really good canopy metrics from the LiDAR data.
Well, and what I'm thinking, Zeke, is that gives you a snapshot of what it looks like today, but how would you know what the historical?
Well, I think you'd be looking at the bare earth model and looking at just the geomorphology. Is it, low slopes? It's almost like soils mapping. You can see the meadows are defined by the geology.
Right.
And you'd be mapping, okay, show us all the areas that have less than, 1.5% slope or something adjacent to existing meadows.
Well, then once you identify those areas, you can go back to the historical photos rather than looking at the entire watershed. Just look at those areas that you've identified as likely or possible.
I do think that that would be useful, but I think one of the things as a group that we gotta get really comfortable with is that we've come up with, or Leah particularly has come up with some new language like snow zones and tails, things like that, which are intended to be treatment packages for those specific geographic areas. Well, I still don't have my mind wrapped around what the hell she's talking about. So we.
Welcome
not
to
that it's
spend
real-
time with Leah.
I know,
You
not
should
that
know
it's real
better.
difficult.
She was actually
quiet last night coming home. Can you imagine that? Not that it's, really terribly hard stuff. It's just, okay, how are we gonna define these things? Because we have to define, we haven't done any kind of treatment mechanism for different ecotones or anything like that yet. So maybe I can.
I think
jump
coming
in.
back real quick, just the concept I was thinking of is that you don't have to do the entire watershed. We're interested in mountain meadows, and so we could say like, it's this chunk of the watershed, right? We're not looking for mountain meadows down in the canyon. We're not looking for them down at 3,000 feet necessarily, but on the lava flats in this kind of upper northern part of the watershed, or including kind of over on the east side. You could get specific about a project and say, okay, we're going to look at them above 5,000 feet in these on private lands, right? Places where we actually think we can get something done.
So Zeke, I'm gonna throw this back at you and go, if we got a large landscape scale, approval or something like that, they would wanna know a big baseline like that. That's the only scale that would pay for something like this.
Mm-hmm.
But still you would have to show the history, because what we're showing is this is an ecological problem that we're trying to solve.
Mm-hmm.
And here's the dimensions of this problem, and based on things like Marion Creek, if you do this, this is what happens to the system.
Mm-hmm.
So those are kind of the three things that we would have to display, and then we could say, oh, by the way, 10% of this whole basin is that component. And therefore, we can extrapolate that if you do this kind of work in this basin, this is what you might expect, right?
So is what you're saying, look at it with what we have right now, where are these types of these situations?
These opportunities.
And how much area is it, and then maybe contemplate a greater resolution of data.
I'm just throwing it out, but those three pieces, the piece that Jay's talking about, which is on the ground, what do I need to know, how do I approach this? And then what does it mean in the watershed? Because this watershed is notable in the Sierras for the amount of meadow that it has, period. I mean, that's one of the things that stands out about the feather. And so that gets into the bigger thing. If you have these meadows that we can't see anymore that used to be here, then they should be identified as areas under this strategy that we want to start focusing on. And what would the evaluation metric look like? That ties into what Jay's doing. So that's the loop that we're really trying to develop here. But I understand it's real project by project, landowner by landowner. But I am going to throw it back at you from what you've heard today. Then, what would something like that look like? And I know we want to look at those old photos. And we want to know how much of this watershed really is meadow, whether it's in a meadow condition or not.
So maybe I'm going to show probably I'm from the Rocky Mountains, but do we have dry meadows? I think we're talking wet meadows, but not all meadows have a creek going through them. I harken back to graduate school when my roommate wrote his master's thesis on meadow encroachment. And those meadows he was looking at weren't wet. I mean, not the kind of wet meadows with a creek going through them. They were open areas that for soil purposes, I think he was doing a lot of soil mapping. So do we have those kind of meadows in the watershed, or are we talking just what I've been defined as a wet meadow? And it leads into what Leah is saying, what's the coverage of those? I don't know that. Maybe those kinds of meadows occur at a higher altitude where you have a snowbank that melts later. I don't know.
We have some of those meadows along 89.
Well, just like Jay was saying, this isn't a perennial creek,
Jay,
right?
do you have those kinds of meadows?
Yeah, there are areas, and I don't know why they haven't had conifer encroachment. Maybe they are, and we haven't been around long enough to really observe it.
And I'm trying to remember Bill's paper, but I think it had something to do with the soils.
Yeah, probably does.
Yeah, shipping encroachments from happening.
Yeah.
serpentine soils, it was.
That's why I think that if we can get LiDAR data, yes, it's expensive, but it is a really great baseline. And I know that the Forest Service did some over the Moonlight Fire to look at the geomorphology, faulting, and soils. And that way we can understand water. For me, when you look at fractured rock and where streams come from, runoff, things like that, I think that the LiDAR data would be really useful at that level as a baseline. But also looking at who has done LiDAR, or maybe somebody's already done some of those areas and we just don't know it, so we don't need to duplicate something. But to be able to use the data. Okay.
Go ahead, Ryan.
My master's thesis was on LiDAR.
Confession.
And the technology is much better. I'm old, so the technology is much better now. However, the cost associated with the benefit to get down to the data you want is astronomical. Yeah. When I did it, it was you could basically get a pretty solid 3-meter DEM, and you could get better than that. And I looked at geomorphology in streams. It was in the coastal mountains, a little bit different topography, but to get any worthwhile information on it, you needed better resolution. That resolution is there now, but it comes at a price. You're talking multiple points per square foot, and to do a large area. I've kind of lost touch with how much it would cost, but I think it would be quite expensive. And then the computing power to analyze it.
Right, and that's where the
Well, it's just in the instrumentation law, it's really questionable.
they shared some of that data with the departments at Chico State, so some students are want to take those types of projects as graduate projects. But.
Okay, good, Brian.
Okay, so a few things about the LiDAR. Okay, so we've flown Meadow Valley, Story, and the Moonlight Antelope areas. We actually also, I just got the 1941 air photos of that Moonlight Antelope area, georeferenced, georectified into a mosaic too. So I want to give props to both methods because I think they're both valuable tools, valuable data. For those project areas, we already have the Bare Earth model. We've been working with some PSW partners to develop some products that didn't require a whole lot of ground truth data, and then we're working on some products that require more ground truthing data in this next field season. Some of the things that we have been able to produce with very little field data are things like canopy cover, shrub cover, stem maps of trees, those kinds of things. I know they've used the Bare Earth model quite a lot to correct, stream layers, like NHD isn't perfect, so we've done that. They've done some work, actually. It was really interesting. The LiDAR data is great at getting streams, but remember there's roads everywhere, and so it doesn't see the culverts. Right. So you need to really have some good culvert data. So LiDAR data in and of itself has some limitations, but I think I agree with what Ryan said. There's a huge investment on the post-processing that I think folks don't really gather, and you really need a partner that can commit to doing that post-processing, because our goal, at least on our forest, is we have some specialists on districts that are actually using the point cloud and able to process the LiDAR themselves, but really to be applicable to most of our ID teams, we need those products out of the point cloud already analyzed. What was I getting at? Okay, so the Tahoe National Forest actually was able to acquire wall-to-wall LiDAR data for the entire forest.
That's the Tahoe.
Now,
So we should get the Sierra.
so yeah, so there's a portion maybe covered. You know, we're really interested actually in talking to the Tahoe folks. They were really impressed by our specialists on the Plumas, who seem to be actually a little bit more dialed in. But there have been some call for proposals by the region for LiDAR projects, acquisition projects. So I'm really interested in wall-to-wall for the Plumas, you know, including the private ground if we could get that. But that would be something that we would have to develop a partnership for and get other interested parties, maybe leverage different funds. Certainly at this point, it's just like a wish and a prayer. But if we could, you know, especially with private, RSL, I know the Remote Sensing Lab in Region 5 just did a call for proposals this last year, and they're covering the Burney Gardens portion, the Lassen CFLR. So it may be just something to keep in the group's mind if people are interested. Maybe we could pool together resources to maybe put together either a partial or a full acquisition. But it'd be something to, you know, get on your project list, but knowing that that's going to fall in a prioritization based on some of the input. I know when, you know, we were at a little bit over $1 an acre for LiDAR acquisition. I think when you go bigger, you can get a little bit less for that, but that still is more money. So the cool thing is that they've got, actually I'll leave it at that, but if you're interested, we're definitely interested from the Plumas point of view of at least cultivating partners on interest in LiDAR acquisition.
Sketched out on the short form.
Okay, so Burkhart's next, and then I want to circle back to Trina was talking about Chico State, and who else is in the queue? John and Jay. Okay.
Yeah, I just would like to point out, it might be nice to understand a little bit more about the genesis of these meadows. I mentioned the other day, to me it looks like the meadows that we see nowadays carry some interesting history, indications of the history of the watershed in terms of where they're located and how they're being eroded nowadays, and the sediment distribution, the type of geology that's occurring. And I think it might be nice to understand more, why do these meadows form to begin with?
Because they're too steep. That's what you said. They're too steep to naturally form, right?
Right. It better needs some more water than usual.
Do you remember back in the beginning of the Krim days, John, when we had that cut in the bank and we went down 8 feet, okay, and then about 4 feet up there was something that looked like a beaver dam, right? And then 4 feet on top of that was about 4 feet of soil, and the cut had gone all the way down 8 feet, right? And we had that radiocarbon, and basically, as I remember it, the meadow started about 1500, you know, AD, and then it got completely filled at about the 1890s. You know, when the Hudson Bay came through, it was a creating meadow. It went up to the top of that beaver dam, right? And it was a beaver dam. And then with all the sheep grazing and everything that happened after that, you got 4 feet of sediment on top of that thing. No more beaver activity, and then it cut all the way down. Do you remember that? Yeah. And then we sent it to Fish and Game and like, there were never beavers in here. We're like, right, they were everywhere else but here. But that was our first clue that beaver, and we always stuck to it. Like, what do you mean they weren't anywhere but they were everywhere here? I mean, this was the easiest place to get to. Of course they took them out here. Huh?
What was that?
That was up, you know, more red clover zone up on the east side. I think it was red clover.
Similar to what's going on with Poplar.
But I know you guys have seen this. It goes up and it goes down, and it was this huge thing in these layers, right? And in there, you're going to find those sticks. And so our theory always was, whether Fish and Game believed it or not, and now they have a big resurgence and they're interested again. But is that beaver were in here and they made these meadows and, you know,
Jim Beck would
Hudson
know.
Bay took them out and then we did a whole bunch of other things and we changed the whole system. So, I mean, that's the theory that we're operating under right now. And there is a lot of interest in reintroducing beaver up in the, like Siskiyou, they're doing it big time for the coho. Is just quit fighting with them, plant more trees, let them do what they do. And one of my most interesting moments, again, back in those old years, is driving around on the east side and running into Louis Payne, the vet, over on the east side, and he drove by, there's only two of us on the road, so you look at each other, right? I'm going one way, he's going on, but in the back of his truck was this big sack with skunks in it. And I was like, who is this guy? And so I pulled off, and he pulled off, and he was going over to this culvert with this bag of skunks. And I'm like, I gotta find out more about this guy. So I stopped, and I went over, and I started talking to him, and he was the vet, and he goes, oh yeah, you got problems with beavers, you just lay one of these skunks on top of those culverts, and they never come back. And so that's what he was doing. He'd go out and he'd get all these roadkill skunks, put them in this bag, and drive them around and stick them on these culverts. So of course I was like, I'm gonna spend the day with this guy. So we drove all over, and his story was, yeah, they need to be here, but you know, they do things like plug up culverts and they eat everything out of house and home, and you don't have any predators and all that sort of thing. But that was one of those moments where, like, yeah, beaver were a big part of this system, and we have to figure out, once we get the system back, like you say, the water table, we got in balance, then what? You know, how do we incorporate that piece, and what does it look like? And all that
By
sort
the
of
way, I still have sitting in my storage 4 or 5 sediment cores from the Lake Lower Club. So anybody who wants to analyze the sediments in terms of geologic evolution of that meadow, it's still sitting.
Who else? Who's next? Sure.
Well, just, I know that Chico State, the GIC, and the geology department and the environmental sciences department have all expressed an interest in LiDAR data and doing processing. You know, the geomorphology, they're very interested. My roommate is a structural geologist. She teaches at Chico State. And so that could be one avenue for processing data. You know, you have students, accuracy, they're learning, but it's a huge workhorse. Another entity that has expressed an interest in doing more of this type of work, I don't know about particular to LiDAR, is the Susanville Rancheria. They have expressed an interest in, and they have purchased some of the technology necessary to do mapping and other things, but they just need the training to do that.
So we'll, if you don't mind, we're gonna have a tribal work group meeting that's on the 18th. So, yeah, so we'll take this conversation forward and say that the work group is tentatively interested in the idea, realize we need partners.
But then on a larger scale, we're also working with some of the North Coast tribes and some of the larger tribes regionally, and maybe that's something that could be regionally housed. That type of thing in the future. Don't know how long it would take to do it, but those are options.
Yeah, we've got 2 projects with LiDAR right now. We're funded by the PSW to do LiDAR for the Karuk tribe to look at tan oak distribution, and we're also doing LiDAR for the Klamath and Six Rivers National Forest for NEPA on some thinning and burning projects near Orleans.
Funding too, if you have a tribal partnership and you have a state university, and then you have different entities working together, you can apply for funding and maybe more easily get it.
All I wanted to bring up was, Lee had brought up a point about how to fund all this, and I wanted us to think not necessarily at the front end, which looks really difficult, but at the back end of these projects. The Aspen effort that took place in the last 5 years, particularly in the last in on the Sierra Belt, was a major project driver from a financial standpoint. Because almost every project that they came up with to remove conifers resulted in a bunch of big conifers being removed. And to get to the underlying aspen growth, you can make a lot of money. I went so far as to do a painting on it called Aspen Mania, because I thought all the Forest Service people at one point we're being driven by these remaining aspen groves to focus on them and say, okay, let's go in there and get these 50 acres. And by the way, we don't have to worry so much about the 30-inch rule or any kind of defining limit. So the projects were great financial makers of money to use on other projects that weren't, that just lost money. The projects you have as remainders on some of the AEISs where it was just service contracts. Not that I want to kill all the white fir, but
Most of them, just most of them.
Where are we?
Go ahead.
Nope. I'm just gonna ask when we're gonna wrap this meeting up.
Well, I find that as long as people's interest is engaged, it seems to go on.
The only thing I was gonna throw in there, and it doesn't necessarily have to do specifically with LiDAR, but just with the whole idea that, you know, there's lots of neat things that we can go out and gather information on. But it seems like we've been doing this a long, long time. And the more money we spend on gathering information, the less money we have on doing projects on the ground that actually make a difference. And so I think we just need to be cautious on how those limited resources are allocated.
Good point. I'm sure the management group will be interested in things on the ground.
And if we're gonna collect that data, I echo what you're saying, because if we are gonna collect that data, we should be able to say very clearly what that benefit of that data is gonna serve in terms of acres treated on the ground.
And that's why we have this category in here. Because the other thing I want to point out is once we can figure out that measurement thing and why we're doing it and how it ties into the work you're already doing, then USGS is supposed to come back into the North Fork in another 2 years and update their big model. And what they said is the big hang up with their model is they don't have the stand level information. Those models are only as good as the stand level information that's going into them. So we're going to direct them to the Forest Service on their vegetation models, but if we can't tie it to specific places that are finer scale, the kind of work that you do to kind of decide what you're going to do out on your ground in places, then, you know, we're going to get the same garbage we got the last time they did the model, which is a barely even. Gary Freeman, the hydrologist, that you'll see on those documents, is doing a lot of the stuff on the climate change and what happened to 250,000 acre feet out of the feather, said he can't use any of those models because they don't get down to the level that can describe the change he measures when he gets into those creeks and they measure those stream flows. So we got a big disconnect, back to what you're saying, between what these models can do and the detail you have to have on the ground, or these models don't mean anything. And so as we roll back in and we get USGS back in here, we want to be able to say, you know, we don't want the same old garbage that you gave us last time, and we have the data in these particular areas that we want to key this model off to. So that's why we're kind of getting at it. It starts from the ground and then it goes up. And that modeling stuff's getting really good, but it still is only as good as the stand data. And so that's just something that will evolve, but I look forward to something on paper that kind of describes where we are and what it is that we need to do to get to this box over here and to start that conversation. And I look forward to this Chico State Tribal Forest Service partnership. That's a nice place to start.
And that may take some while, so it may not be in this funding round, but the management group, some of the discussions that we have had are, yeah, we want boots on the ground, things we want to know that anybody who applies is going to be able to fulfill what they say they're going to, because we've had too many experiences of that not happening. But we don't want to keep anybody out who has a new thing. There has to be some room for planning in there also. And so, and people, smaller entities that may not have the resources, but can show that they can partner with other people that do have the resources. And so there's kind of 3 levels of really looking at funding that we've discussed so far. Those are boots on the ground, yes, of course, but also entities with new ideas, and then also the partnership idea, or the planning.
Okay, you guys,
You're done?
you have food to
Next
take.
meeting.
Okay, we have to set up the next meeting, we have to, I'll be looking forward to anybody that wants to think about this chart and has things to offer, please go ahead and let me know. And of course, we're looking for projects, and I'll be following up to try and get a nice big bucket of projects, even if they're pretty conceptual at this stage. And the reason we don't have to do as much work as the other work groups is we always go last. And so, that's why Meadows plows through and municipal, and then we tag on. Ag is even worse than us sometimes, but we all try and play for last. So,
They're gonna be last in this one.
yeah, they're gonna be last in this round. So kind of the end of June is where we let the other groups go first. And then we can tag on with what we're doing, but we're really still, even though the management group has this deadline of June 1st for projects, we expect to be able to develop more projects and to keep going on that. So end of June, beginning of July, I know we're getting into the vacation season, fire season, all this other things, but how did that work to do the doodle? Was that okay, or do you want me to bracket in some times? I was hoping end of June, first part of July. Obviously, we want to miss July 4th, but is there any days that?
Meadows work group is on June 26th.
6th, we'll go to the 23rd.
After, we want to be after everybody else.
Why?
Okay, how about the 30th then?
June 30, yeah.
Okay, well, we'll throw it out.
This room?
Do you like early? Is early better, later better? What's everybody's?
Yeah.
Early's better?
Early.
Jay, you in on 9 o'clock? 9 o'clock?
5 on the 30th.
Okay. Okay, you guys. Thanks so much.
What day?
We're getting there. And then we'll keep you updated on the big push we're doing to make sure that they don't get those stupid storage projects and not talk about the updated watershed.